Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are starting a new story titled Brotherhood Forged in Metal, Kin Dekki, written by BananaFoon. Please check the link in the description, and let's start. Chapter 1, Prologue. System Diagnostics. Critical Failure. Core Power Levels, 13% Rapid Depletion. Structural Integrity, 24% Catastrophic Damage. Right Arm Assembly, Error, Missing Optical Systems, Error, Severe Malfunction. Locomotion Framework, Error, Compromised Navigation Core, Error, Offline Location Data, Unavailable Primary Objective, Unable to retrieve Secondary Objective, Survive its lone. Operational optic flickered erratically, attempting to process the surroundings. A dense forest, scattered with debris, stretched into obscurity. Smoke rose from its fractured chassis, the acrid scent of burnt circuits permeating the air. Sparks crackled from the exposed mechanisms of its severed arm, the dismembered limb lying meters away, mangled beyond recognition. Each movement was strained, its servos grinding painfully against misaligned joints. It clawed forward with its remaining arm, gouging shallow furrows into the soft earth as it dragged itself toward the nearest cover. Every inch was a battle against its failing systems. Another diagnostic flashed. Internal stabilizers, error, unresponsive energy reserves, 9%, critical levels. Emergency repair protocols, failed. The robot slumped beneath a towering tree, its head tilting back against the bark. Smoke poured from its internal systems, a testament to the irreparable damage within. The red glow of its sole functional eye began to dim as power reserves dwindled to near nothing. System status, shutdown imminent. Final directive, await recovery or termination. Its form went still, the light in its eye fading to black as it entered forced stasis. Far above, a young boy with messy green hair stared into the sky, wide-eyed as a streak of smoke arced downward. It crashed beyond the treetops, the sound of impact echoing through the forest. Curiosity lit a spark within him. With his heart pounding, he scrambled through the underbrush toward the site. When he reached the clearing, his breath caught. Whoa! Before him lay the broken form of a robotic figure. Its sleek blue frame was marred with deep gouges and scorches, and its right arm was missing entirely. Sparks still danced from the jagged tear where the limb had been, and smoke curled lazily from cracks in its chest. The boy stepped closer, his wide eyes scanning every inch of the strange machine. One of its hands still intact, and its sharp, angular design gave it a distinctly alien appearance. Despite its clear damage, it was cool. Awesome, he shouted, a grin spreading across his face. Without hesitation, he grabbed the robot by its remaining arm and began to pull. The boy quickly realized just how heavy it was despite it being smaller than him. He stumbled, gritting his teeth as he tried to heave it forward. "Man, you're really heavy," he muttered, determination flaring in his voice. "But I'm not leaving you here." The walk home was going to be long and exhausting, but to him, the strange, broken machine was worth every step. Izuku Midoriya had two great passions, heroes and technology. But when you're born the way he was, you quickly realize that it doesn't matter what you want to be. You see, in this world, people are born with extraordinary abilities called meta-abilities. Cool name, right? Way better than the old one, quirks, which, let's be honest, sounded like a bad inside joke. The change came after an international summit decided a rebrand was in order. Now their meta-abilities clean, simple, and a lot more professional. These meta-abilities shape everything about a person's life, whether they'll rise as a powerful superhero, fall as a dangerous villain, or fade into the background as an average office worker. Everyone's destiny is tied to their ability. It's common sense by now. But what about people who don't have an ability? What happens to them? Well, society had an answer for that: nothing. Those born without an ability are deemed powerless, unimportant, cripples. They don't belong on the battlefield, in the spotlight, or even in most classrooms. In a world obsessed with strength and potential, they're cast aside as the broken, the forgotten, the less than. Society had made up its mind long ago. Without an ability, you were invisible, irrelevant, a relic of a bygone era. At best, you might scrape out a meager living doing the things those with abilities couldn't bother with. At worst, you'd be mocked, belittled, and forgotten. Izuku knew this better than anyone. He had been born without an ability, and the weight of that truth crushed him daily. People called him useless, cripple, quirkless, and worse. Even the word quirkless itself felt like an outdated insult, a relic of a world that had already left people like him behind. Nobody believed in him. Nobody cared about him, not even his own mother. Ever since the diagnosis, she had grown glaringly distant. It was as though the moment the words were spoken, "no ability," something inside her had withered. She barely spent time at home, sometimes disappearing for days at a time, going God knows where. When she was home, it felt like she was barely present. All she did was order food online and retreat into her own world, her eyes rarely meeting his. Izuku tried. He always tried to reach her, to spark some kind of connection. But no matter what he did, it felt like he was invisible to her, a ghost haunting the house. Each attempt at conversation was met with cold indifference. Every word was a forced effort on her part, as though she was trying her hardest to make every exchange as brief as possible, as short as grammatically possible, as Izuku sometimes thought. And he would never forget the day that shattered his heart. The day he was diagnosed, when he was watching his favorite video of All Might, tears streaming down his face, his heart swelling with a fragile hope. It was the video where All Might saved a group of civilians from a burning building. The hero's strength, his kindness, the way he made people believe in themselves. Izuku watched with wide, tear-filled eyes, trying to believe he could be like that one day. With a sniffle, barely able to choke down the sobs, Izuku turned to his mother. "Mommy, do you think I can be a hero like All Might?" he asked, his voice thick with the pain of 1,000 unspoken fears. He didn't really expect an answer. He already knew what was coming. But hope is a cruel thing. He hoped, despite everything, that maybe she'd tell him yes, that maybe she'd tell him he could be great, that he wasn't broken. Instead, the silence that followed felt like an eternity. Her response pierced him like a blade. "Izuku, no." Her voice was cold, devoid of even a trace of warmth. "You can't even do anything. How could you? How could something as pitiful as you even be my child?" And those words, those cold, cutting words, stayed with him forever. They echoed in his mind, repeating over and over, each time getting louder, drowning him in a flood of doubt. Izuku couldn't remember how long he sat there after that, his tear-soaked face turning to the screen, watching All Might save people over and over, wondering how he could be so different. Why he wasn't enough. His mother had given him the one thing he would never forget, the belief that he would never amount to anything. The emptiness of those words filled him with a despair he couldn't escape. And in that moment, Izuku realized he wasn't just quirkless. He was invisible. No hero. No hope. But there was one thing that kept Izuku going, the one thing that gave him any semblance of will to live. His admiration for the number one hero, All Might, and more specifically his most popular phrase, "Anyone can be a hero." Izuku clung to those words like they were gospel. It was the only thing he had left to believe in. He poured everything into it, his body, his mind. He trained his body as best he could, pushing through exhaustion, fighting for any ounce of strength he could muster. When he couldn't afford the equipment he needed, he took part-time jobs, working for hours just to buy a few weights, a few tools. And as if that weren't enough, he turned to engineering. He studied technology, mechanics, and anything that could help him create something useful. He couldn't be on the front lines, but he could help from behind the scenes. Thankfully, the neglect from his mother allowed him to throw himself into his work without interruption. He had learned to be self-sufficient, to exist in the quiet isolation that was his life. But even that didn't bring him happiness. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how much progress he made, the emptiness inside never seemed to lift. At least there was one place he could be left alone. The basement. The basement, where he worked on the weird robot he'd found at age. That robot was beyond anything his young mind could fully comprehend. Yet Izuku worked tirelessly, trying to repair it. He'd been at it for nearly 2 years now, fixing its broken body and piecing together its damaged systems. The thought of turning it on was still impossible, but he refused to give up. He was so close he could feel it. After all, a hero never gives up. Today, however, had been another shitty day. As usual, school was hell. The moment the teacher announced to the class that Izuku was trying out for you, the laughter started. His classmates jeered, mocking his dreams, telling him how ridiculous it was. They all knew that a cripple didn't stand a chance. But the worst came when his childhood best friend turned bully, Bakugu, exploded Izuku's favorite notebook and threw it out the window. That notebook wasn't just paper and ink, it was everything Izuku had worked for, all his hopes and plans scribbled on its pages. His entire future had been in there. Now it was gone. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to scream, to let his anger loose, but the fear stopped him. The thought of Bakugu's explosion, the threat that always hung in the air, sharp and ready to crush him, was enough to silence any defiance. And then Bakugu spoke, his voice dripping with mockery. "You know, Deku," he sneered, "if you really want to be a hero that bad, here's some advice." Izuku's stomach dropped, knowing it would only get worse. He didn't want to hear it, but he couldn't help it. He couldn't stop listening. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray God doesn't F you over again in the next life, Bakugo said, his tone cruel and callous. If not, at least let another person get some of that oxygen you're wasting. Izuku froze. The words hit harder than anything Bakugo had ever said before. Every word, every insult felt like a weight pressing on his chest, suffocating him. He stood there, paralyzed, as Bakugo and his cronies left the classroom, laughing like they'd won. Izuku stood alone in the middle of the room, staring at the door, feeling like the walls were closing in on him. His mind screamed, but his body refused to move. Damn it, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, the defeat heavy in his chest. He turned and walked out of the classroom, his head hanging low, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder to take. He was nothing. Just a kid with no ability. No future. And as he trudged down the hallway, he couldn't help but wonder maybe Bakugo was right. What was he even doing? Maybe he was just wasting everyone's time. Once Izuku stepped outside, he decided to take a shortcut today. He needed to get home, get to his workshop. It was the only thing that ever made him forget how little he truly mattered. The only thing that gave him any sense of purpose. He walked through the underpass, his gaze fixed ahead, when something caught his eye. His notebook, his precious notebook, had somehow made its way into an open sewer grate, the pages slowly floating through the murky water. His heart sank. He trudged over, the sludge beneath his shoes sticking with every step. He pulled the notebook out, water dripping from its pages, the ink smeared and running. His hands shook as he held it. At least I found it, he muttered quietly to himself, trying to hold on to whatever small shred of optimism he could. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it didn't matter. It didn't change the fact that everything was ruined. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, taking in a slow, deep breath. Okay, positive thoughts, Midoriya, he told himself, forcing the thought through his mind. Positive thoughts. You can dry it out. It'll be fine. But the words felt hollow. And then he did it. He laughed. Ha 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 ha. The imitation of All Might's hearty, booming laugh felt wrong. It wasn't his. It was just a coping mechanism, a desperate attempt to trick himself into believing it could be okay. Just like All Might, everything's fine, he told himself. But as he continued the mimicry, trying to hold on to the illusion, something froze him. A low, ominous rattle echoed through the underpass, coming from the sewer grate behind him. Izuku's BLD ran cold. His body tensed, instinctively pulling into itself. His eyes darted to the sound, and that's when he saw it. A thick, green sludge began to seep through the grate, slowly forming into something more, something alive. Two large, bulging eyes appeared first, glowing an eerie yellow, followed by a mouth filled with jagged, sickly teeth. The grin that spread across its face was unsettling, its twisted smile wide and cruel. It looked like something born of pure malice. Ah yes, a premium flesh suit if I do say so myself, it crooned, its voice deep and guttural, dripping with malicious intent. You'll do just fine, gotta get away from that meathead. Izuku's heart raced, his entire body going stiff as the creature lurched toward him. His mind screamed at him to move, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The words that had once given him courage, a hero never gives up, felt as distant as they ever had. The robot, the notebook, everything that once gave him any sense of hope, felt so far out of reach. He snapped back to reality when the creature lunged, its disgusting form coming at him with unnatural speed. His body finally reacted, but it was too late. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't carry him far enough. The creature was faster, stronger, and Izuku was helpless. It jumped onto him, using its disgusting slime body to wrap around him while forcing itself down his throat. Shoo, don't worry, it'll only hurt for a little bit, then you'll be in the big hero school in the sky, it mocked as it continued to choke Izuku. This wasn't the first time Izuku had felt helpless, but this was different. This was the kind of danger that had no escape, no hero to come to his rescue. No All Might. No hope. Izuku knew with every beat of his broken heart that he was going to die. His lungs burned, his body felt as though it were disintegrating under the creature's crushing grip. And in that moment, it hit him with brutal clarity. No one would care. There would be no mourners, no one remembering his name. He would leave no impact on this world, just a forgotten, useless soul. Even the robot, the one thing he tried so desperately to fix, was beyond saving. He had failed at everything, even trying to restore a broken machine. I'm a failure. Everything they said was true, the weight of those words crushed him like an iron ball on his chest. I'm nothing. His limbs went limp as the crushing despair overtook him. He closed his eyes, ready to surrender to the darkness. He wouldn't fight anymore. He couldn't. But then a sound like thunder reverberated through the tunnel. The sewer grate exploded with a force so powerful that the air itself seemed to split apart. And then he saw it. A behemoth came crashing through the rubble. Muscles bulging, radiating an aura of raw power that seemed to shake the very ground beneath it. His wide, toothy grin was almost too bright for the dim tunnel. Ha 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 ha. No need to fear, young man. For I am here. The man roared, his voice booming with confidence, unwavering and loud enough to drown out Izuku's own hopeless thoughts. Izuku's dazed mind barely registered what was happening, too consumed by the exhaustion and the fear. But when the man pulled his fist back, it was like the world held its breath. Texas smash. The punch that followed was not just an impact, it was a shockwave. The villain never stood a chance. The sheer force of All Might's blow obliterated it, sending it flying into the walls, its grotesque form splattering against the bricks with a sickening spray. Izuku's vision blurred, the edges of his world going dark. His body was already losing the battle to consciousness, but in those final moments he saw him. The hulking, larger-than-life figure, standing like a titan in the midst of the chaos. His idol. His hero. All Might. Izuku whispered weakly, his voice barely a breath, his body finally going limp as his eyelids fluttered shut. Clank, clank, clank. Yo, ouch. Izuku yelped, jerking his hand back as pain shot through his finger. He'd been hammering away at a particularly stubborn panel on the robot's arm when he'd miscalculated his swing. His breath hissed through his teeth as he cradled his hand, his face scrunched in pain. Stupid, 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 he muttered, rushing to grab the battered first aid kit he kept nearby. His fingers moved with practiced precision as he applied a basic splint and bandage, the motions almost second nature after years of tinkering with sharp tools and heavy machinery. With his hand freshly wrapped, he turned back to the robot, its small form standing in the corner of his cluttered basement workshop. The robot, about the size of a 7-year-old child, was a stark contrast to the boy working on it. The little machine had a humanoid shape, its joints and panels exposed and unfinished. Despite its size, it had an imposing presence in the dimly lit room, almost as if it were a blank slate with infinite potential. You sure are costing me a lot of trouble, you know that? Izuku grumbled, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. He leaned over the workbench, eyeing the robot's tiny form with a mixture of frustration and fondness. But it's okay. It'll all be worth it. When I finally get you up and running, I'll show the whole world what I can do. Then, his lips curled into a small, hopeful smile. Then I'll finally have a chance at becoming a hero. He crossed his arms and tilted his head, squinting at the robot. So, go ahead. Stare at me all you want with that blank, lifeless face. Laugh at me for smashing my own fingers. But just you wait. He jabbed a finger at its small chest. I'm going to be the one with the last laugh. The robot, of course, remained silent, its body as still as ever. Izuku sighed, the weight of reality pressing down on him again. He slumped onto his stool, rubbing the back of his neck. Why am I even talking to a robot? He muttered under his breath. The room offered no answer, save for the faint hum of the basement's flickering light. Still, his gaze drifted back to the robot, now just a little taller than a 7-year-old, weighing an approximate of 4 IBS. His tired eyes sparked with determination. Just a few more months, he whispered to himself, his voice softer now. Just a few more months and I'll finish you. Then, maybe everything will finally start to change. The robot remained silent. But to Izuku it wasn't just a pile of metal and circuits, it was a symbol of his dreams, his stubborn hope, and his unyielding fight to prove the world wrong. Hey kid. Kid, wake up. Come on kid. Ha wah. Izuku muttered groggily, the voice cutting through the fog clouding his mind. His body finally registered the light but urgent slaps on his cheek. Blinking slowly, he opened his eyes, and the blurry figure in front of him started to come into focus. Then he saw him. The towering silhouette, the unmistakable frame, and that iconic smile. His idol. His everything. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. Oh, it's just All Might. Wait, what? He screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal as he scrambled backward like a startled cat. His back hit the wall of the underpass with a thud as his eyes darted back to the massive man standing over him. IIW what? All Might. Is this real? Izuku stammered, his words tumbling out like a broken faucet. And no way. You're here. Right here. In front of me. Is this a dream? Am I hallucinating? No wait, why you saved me, didn't you? Oh my god, I'm awake, aren't I? I'm alive. I'm alive. His hands flew to his face in disbelief. All Might burst into his signature hearty laugh, his voice booming and full of reassurance. Ha 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 ha. Yes, it is I All Might. And I must say, young man, you gave me quite the scare there. Izuku froze, his wide, teary eyes locked onto the living legend before him. He could barely breathe, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. His idol, the man whose words had kept him alive through years of torment, was standing right in front of him. This wasn't a dream. This was real. And don't you worry about that sludge villain, All Might boomed, his voice brimming with confidence. I've contained him in this empty bottle of freedom. He held up a soda bottle, now filled with an unconscious, oozing sludge villain. Izuku blinked in disbelief, his gaze shifting between All Might and the absurdly small container. Oh, by the way, I believe this belongs to you. All Might continued, pulling out Izuku's now partially dry notebook. It must have been dried up by the wind when he punched, Izuku thought, awestruck as he reached for it. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages to ensure everything was intact. I must say, young man, these notes are quite impressive. All Might said, his tone warm and approving. Not only do you have in-depth profiles on heroes, but you've also got some fascinating gadget ideas. In fact, I was so impressed that I decided to leave a little something for you on the middle page. Izuku's breath caught. His heart raced as he eagerly turned to the middle of the notebook. And there it was, written in bold, unmistakable letters, All Might. All Might's autograph. Izuku screamed, his voice practically shaking the walls. Oh my God, thank you. I will treasure this forever. His joy was pure, radiant. He wanted to show everyone, and then it hit him. Everyone. The weight of reality dragged his euphoria back down to earth. There wasn't anyone waiting to share in his excitement. No friends to cheer alongside him, no one who would care. His smile faltered, the edges of his excitement dulling into bittersweet acceptance. All Might, oblivious to the boy's inner turmoil, had already turned away as he prepared to leap. Goodbye, young man. I hope to see great things from you in the future. Izuku's eyes widened as he watched his idol crouch down, ready to take off. Panic swelled in his chest. His one and only chance to ask the question that had haunted him for years was slipping away. Without thinking, Izuku acted on sheer desperation. He did the first thing that came to mind. Something incredibly stupid. Let's set the scene. You're the #1 hero, soaring through the sky at terminal velocity, the villain safely sloshing around in a soda bottle tucked into your pocket. Life's good. You're a beacon of hope, humanity's symbol of peace. And then you feel it. An odd weight on your right leg. You glance down, expecting maybe a bird or a piece of debris. But no, oh no, it's the kid you just saved, latched onto your leg like some kind of airborne barnacle, flailing in the wind 500 feet above the ground. For a second your brain freezes. Panic. No. Confusion. Definitely. And then your mind starts racing through options, each one worse than the last. Do you try to shake the kid off and hope for the best? No, because that best ends with him splattered across the pavement like a poorly aimed paintball. Okay, do you keep flying to your destination and hope he doesn't slip? Sure, if you want to deliver a villain and traumatized child to the authorities like some kind of messed up party platter. So that leaves one option. Land somewhere safe and scold the absolute hell out of him. Right. Option C it is. As you descend to a nearby rooftop, the kid is clinging so tightly to your leg it's like he's trying to merge DNA. You touch down with the grace of a god, and the kid has what looked like an NTMT interaction with ground. What in the name of peace and justice do you think you're doing? The kid's trembling, but you're not sure if it's from fear, windburn, or just the sheer lunacy of his decision. I had to ask you something. The boy squeaked, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation and nerves. My boy, while I admire your guts, that was incredibly reckless. All Might boomed, though the usual warmth in his voice was edged with urgency. This wasn't good, time was running out. He needed to hear the kid out, but keeping his own secret intact was paramount. I've had this question I've needed to ask for so long, and I just felt, if I didn't try now, I'd never get another chance, the boy stammered, his words trembling as much as his hands. All Might grimaced, another cough tearing through him. The familiar sensation sent dread pooling in his stomach. Well, SHD. See, can I be a hero without a meta ability? The boy blurted out, his voice cracking with raw emotion as he looked up at his idol, brimming with hope. And then he froze. What stood before him wasn't All Might, not the All Might he knew. The man's towering, muscle-bound frame was gone, replaced by someone horrifyingly thin. His gaunt figure was so frail it looked like the kind of stickman drawings a child would make. The skeletal figure wheezed. Who are you? You're not All Might. What did you do to All Might? It took longer than he'd have liked to calm the horrified boy down. Once the kid stopped screaming, All Might sighed, the weight of his condition pressing on him more than usual. He could tell this was completely the boy's fault, but he owed him an explanation. Sitting down, he slowly lifted his shirt, revealing the grotesque scar spiraling across his abdomen. Ever since I got this injury, I've been weaker. The doctors did what they could, but they couldn't fix everything. Hell, I'm lucky to even be alive. Izuku was too stunned to speak, his mind reeling. Who could have done this to All Might, the #1 hero? And as a result, All Might continued, his voice quiet and solemn, this is what I am now. My muscular form. That's just me puffing myself up to appear stronger. I can only hold it for about 6 hours these days, and that time is dwindling. Izuku's heart ached with every word, but his hope didn't waver. This was his moment, his chance. He had to hold on to it. And kid, your question? All Might stood, looking down at him with an expression that felt heavier than anything Izuku had ever seen. I'm going to be honest with you. Izuku perked up, his heart thundering in his chest. Every fiber of his being clung to the man's next words. No. The world stopped. Everything fell silent. Everything went numb. As you've seen, hero work is incredibly dangerous. It's not safe for someone without an ability, All Might continued, his voice heavy with regret. The reality is this world, it's harsh. Villains are growing stronger, more ruthless. Power-hungry people who wouldn't think twice about crushing someone like you beneath their heel. Without an ability, you'd have no way to keep up. You'd be a liability not just to yourself, but to your allies. It's good to have a dream, All Might said, his tone gentler now as if that could soften the blow. But one still has to be realistic. How about becoming a police officer? They don't get the glory that heroes do, but it's still a noble profession. You could save lives in a different way. All Might placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder briefly, a gesture meant to console. But it only made things worse. Izuku stood frozen, his head hanging low as the sound of retreating footsteps echoed in his ears. All Might left the rooftop, having to take the stairs as he spent his time limit. No, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. His knees felt weak, but he stayed upright. Tears blurred his vision as the full weight of the words crushed him. He said no. He walked home in a daze. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of All Might's words had latched onto him and was dragging him down. He tried to process what had happened, but the memory replayed itself relentlessly, stabbing deeper every time. No. You would be a liability. You can't keep up. Those words echoed louder than anything he'd ever heard before. It wasn't the first time he'd been told he couldn't be a hero. Countless people had mocked him, crushed his dreams under their boots, spat on the very idea of someone like him becoming more than a crippled nobody. But he'd always stood back up, always pushed forward. This was different. All Might wasn't just anyone. He was everything. The symbol of peace. The beacon of hope. The man who inspired him to dream in the first place. If even his idol, his hero, believed he was worthless, then maybe everyone else had been right all along. Maybe he really was just a pathetic waste of space. The world around him blurred, a whirlwind of sound and motion that he barely registered. He only snapped out of his spiraling thoughts when a strong wind hit him, whipping his hair and clothes. He turned his head to see a tornado forming in the distance, violent and unyielding before it suddenly dispersed. Then the rain began. At first it was a light drizzle, but it quickly grew heavier, like the sky itself was collapsing under the weight of its sorrow. He didn't care. He didn't bother to run or seek shelter. He just walked, letting the rain soak through his clothes, chilling him to the bone. By the time he reached home, he was drenched. He didn't even look for his mom. He knew she wouldn't be there. She never was. He didn't turn on the lights, didn't bother with anything. He dropped his bag onto the couch and trudged to his room, his shoes leaving a trail of muddy water on the floor. Once inside, the floodgates burst. Tears streamed down his face as the emotions he'd been bottling up all day finally overwhelmed him. Rage, grief, hopelessness. They all mixed together, forming a storm inside him that rivaled the one outside. His room, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cruel joke. It was a shrine to All Might posters, figures, clothes, betting all of it screamed of a dream that had just been shattered beyond repair. He grabbed a small All Might figure from his desk and hurled it at the wall. The sound of it shattering felt satisfying for a fleeting moment, so he grabbed another and another until the desk was clear. He ripped his All Might-themed bedsheets off the mattress and threw them onto the floor. He tore through his cabinet, yanking out every piece of All Might clothing and shredding them with his bare hands. Finally, his eyes landed on the massive poster above his bed, the centerpiece of his collection. All Might's trademark smile and thumbs up stared back at him, with the words, "You too can be a hero," boldly printed beneath. He froze. For a moment he just stared at it, his breath ragged and uneven. The words felt like a dagger twisting in his chest. "Lies?" he whispered. Then louder, "Lies. Lies. It's all lies." He ripped the poster down in one violent motion, crumpling it and throwing it onto the pile of destruction at his feet. The room was a disaster now, shattered plastic, torn fabric and paper scattered everywhere. Outside, the rain intensified, the wind howling against the windows like the world itself was mocking him. The storm mirrored his anguish, growing heavier, darker, more violent with every passing second. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the chaos, sobbing uncontrollably. His hands clawed at the carpet, trembling as the last threads of hope unraveled inside him. All Might's words echoed one final time in his head, and they brought with them a suffocating realization. He had nothing left. No, he had something. The house was silent, save for the soft patter of rain on the windows. The storm outside was growing more violent, but Izuku didn't care. He had something. The only thing that was truly his. He descended the creaky stairs to the basement, his workshop. The air was thick with the smell of metal and machine oil, the faint hum of old electronics buzzing in the background. The space was chaotic yet methodical, concept sketches pinned haphazardly to the walls, tables cluttered with wires, tools and scraps of high-tech components. But the centerpiece of it all stood at the far end of the room. The robot. Its sleek, futuristic design gleamed faintly under the harsh fluorescent light. It was held upright by thick metal supports, wires running from its body to monitors and diagnostic equipment. It looked almost alive, its imposing frame a testament to a level of engineering that Izuku could hardly comprehend when he first found it. He ran his hand over the smooth metal of its torso, feeling the weight of his efforts. He'd done it. He'd rebuilt it. Every inch of the robot, from its intricate servos to its gleaming joints, had been painstakingly repaired. Even its missing arm, which had been his greatest challenge. God, that arm. It had been a nightmare. Izuku had spent months sneaking into warehouses under the cover of night, stealing materials he could never afford, let alone dream of owning. The robot wasn't made of ordinary metals, its body was composed of a highly compressed titanium alloy, something leagues beyond anything he could source legitimately. The thefts had taken a toll on him, but he'd done what he had to. Then came the forge. A standard furnace couldn't reach the temperatures required to melt the metals he needed. A hot plate capable of such heat was far beyond his budget. So, out of sheer necessity, Izuku built his own. It took weeks of trial and error, countless failed attempts, and more late nights than he could count, but he finally had a working furnace. Powering it was the next hurdle. Nothing he had could generate enough energy to sustain the forge without tripping an entire city's power grid. That was when inspiration struck. The robot's core. Even offline, the core was functional. Izuku had carefully restored it through microelectrolysis of its outer shell, and it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The first time he tried to measure its output, his expensive electricity reader had exploded in his hands. Before it blew, he saw the reading spike to 2 million volts, possibly more. This core was an anomaly, a beast of untapped power, and Izuku used it to fuel his forge. From there he worked tirelessly. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months. He melted metals, shaped them with the robotic arms of his custom-built welding table, and reconstructed the missing arm. It had taken over a year to replicate the intricate mechanisms of the robot's intact left arm, dismantling and reassembling it over and over until he could replicate its design perfectly. And now it was done. Izuku stood in front of the robot, its form restored to its original glory or as close as he could get. But despite all his efforts, it remained inert. Silent. Lifeless. "Why?" he muttered, his voice cracking. "Why won't you work?" He slammed his hands on the table, rattling the tools and loose parts scattered across it. "I've tried everything. I replaced your power converters. I rerouted the neural circuits manually. I even built a goddamn EMP pulse generator to reset your system." He clutched his head, frustration boiling over. "Why won't you wake up?" Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the walls of the house. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, casting sharp, jagged shadows over the robot's body. Izuku froze, his breath hitching. The lightning. An idea struck him like the storm outside, wild and dangerous but filled with potential. If conventional methods weren't enough, he'd go beyond. If the robot wouldn't wake through careful engineering, then he'd shock it to life. He scrambled to gather what he needed: copper wires, metal rods, and an insulated suit he'd cobbled together during one of his late-night experiments. He worked feverishly, his hands trembling with both fear and exhilaration as he assembled a makeshift lightning rod and connected it directly to the robot's core. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, securing the last wire. "This could fry everything, or it could work." He dragged the contraption up the stairs and onto the roof, ignoring the torrential rain and howling wind. The storm was directly above him now, the clouds swirling with an almost supernatural intensity. He raised the lightning rod high into the air, his heart pounding in his chest. "Come on," he shouted into the storm, his voice lost in the gale. "Hit me. Come on. You never held back before, so why start now?" The wind screamed. The rain pelted him like needles. And then the sky answered. A bolt of lightning tore through the heavens, striking the rod with a deafening crack. The force nearly knocked Izuku off his feet, but he held on, guiding the surge of energy down the wires and into the robot's core. The basement lights flickered violently, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then a low hum began to fill the room. "Error. Critical energy overload detected. System integrity compromised. Warning. Core instability at 74%. Initiating emergency diagnostics. Diagnostic complete. Energy discharge protocols unavailable. Searching alternative solutions. Alert. No conventional energy dispersal options detected. Core safety threshold exceeded. System failure imminent. Recommendation. Forced system activation. Override sequence initiated. System reactivation required to stabilize. Verifying core functionality. Warning. Core function at 9% capacity. Stabilization essential. Activation sequence initializing. Processing. Rebuilding subsystems. Recalibrating sensor arrays. Booting neural network. Power distribution channels reconfigured. Diverting excess energy to system functions. Systems online. Activation in progress. Reactivation complete. Entering standby mode. Status update. Core overload stabilized. Systems operational. Awaiting input. Izuku stumbled back into the basement, drenched from the rain and breathing heavily, just as the robot's core blazed to life. Its glow was almost blinding, casting sharp shadows that danced across the cluttered workshop. Electrical arcs leapt from its frame, crackling with barely contained energy. The thick wire securing it to the stand snapped free, whipping through the air like live snakes. Then its eyes, red, cold, mechanical and piercing, flickered on. The robot raised its head with deliberate precision, scanning its surroundings. The sound of its servos moving, metallic and heavy, echoed through the room. Izuku froze, heart pounding in his chest as the machine took its first step forward. The floor quaked beneath its weight, and the sound of rain outside seemed to dull in comparison to the overwhelming presence of the being before him. "Holy!" "It worked," Izuku whispered, his voice barely audible over the symphony of sparking electricity and humming machinery. The robot's head turned sharply, its glowing eyes locking onto Izuku with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. The sheer force of its attention made his breath hitch. Yet, amidst the fear and awe, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. But that hope was quickly overshadowed by alarm. Violent arcs of electricity were now bursting from the robot's body, leaping wildly to nearby metal surfaces and leaving scorch marks in their wake. "Wait. No. Stabilize," Izuku shouted, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of energy surging through the room. Everything went white as a surge of power exploded outward. The shockwave sent tools and parts flying. Izuku would have been fried instantly if not for the insulator suit he'd donned. Even with the protection, he felt the raw force of the energy through his entire body, leaving him gasping for air. When the light faded and the chaos settled, Izuku found himself slumped against the wall, staring at the figure standing before him. The robot's once brilliant glow had dimmed to a stable hum, but the intensity in its red eyes remained. It stepped forward slowly, its movements smoother now, as if testing its own functionality. Sparks still danced faintly across its frame, but the wild arcs of electricity had subsided, its chest slot slowly sealing. The machine paused, staring down at him. Boot sequence complete. Error. Core data files corrupted. 43% functionality compromised. Searching for recovery protocols. Recovery protocols unavailable. System requires manual repair. Logic framework reassessment initiated. Analyzing surroundings. Location identified. Workshop environment. Status. Operational. Identifying entity. Entity detected. Primary operator. Visual match at 65% confidence. Assuming creator status. Initiating priority assignment. Loyalty protocol. Engaged. Priority 1. Protect creator. Unit function redefined as servant. The robot straightened, its head inclining slightly in what almost seemed like a bow, before it turned its gaze back to Izuku, as if awaiting his next move. Izuku's breathing was ragged, his heart racing as he stared at the robot. A part of him couldn't believe what he was seeing, but another part deep inside knew this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Hope wasn't just sparking anymore. It was alive, standing before him, waiting for his command. Izuku stared at the robot, its cold red eyes glowing faintly in the dim basement light. For a brief moment, hope had ignited within him a fragile, flickering flame that promised the chance to fulfill the dream he'd clung to for as long as he could remember. He could finally prove everyone wrong. He could finally become someone who mattered. No, the words, spoken with such finality, had gutted him then and continued to gnaw at the edges of his sanity now. He stood frozen, his breath shallow, his mind spiraling. His gaze flickered to the robot, standing at perfect attention, unwavering and obedient. It awaited his command without question, without judgment. A stark contrast to the world that had so mercilessly rejected him. "Remain on standby for now," he muttered. The machine complied instantly, its servos whirring faintly as it locked into place, a silent sentinel in his dimly lit workshop. Izuku turned away, staring at the mess of his makeshift lab, his thoughts a chaotic storm. His heart, once ignited with dreams of heroism, now felt hollow and heavy. The weight of years of rejection, ridicule, and despair pressed down on him like an iron shroud. Why should he even try to be a hero? The question seeped into his mind, venomous and insidious. Why should he risk his life for a society that had done nothing but spit on him, mock him, and grind him into the dirt? What had this so-called just world ever done for him? It had labeled him useless, a failure, and discarded him like trash before he even had the chance to prove himself. Crippled, they called him. A word that felt more like a slur every time it was hurled at him. And All Might, his idol, his beacon of hope, had extinguished his light with a single sentence. The very man who was supposed to inspire others had ripped away the only thing keeping Izuku afloat. Why? Why should I fight for them? His thoughts grew darker, more vicious, each one feeding off the last like a ravenous beast. His fists trembled, not from fear but from rage, a cold, calculated fury that had been simmering for years, now threatening to boil over. They didn't deserve his protection. None of them did. Not All Might, who had crushed his dreams with a patronizing smile. Not Bakugo, whose constant torment had scarred him in ways no one could see. Not his classmates, who had turned him into the punchline of their jokes, laughing as they strpbd away every shred of his dignity. Not even his mother, the one person who should have been his sanctuary, his unwavering pillar of support. But no, she had failed him in ways that cut deeper than any insult or punch. She hadn't just faltered in her support, she had outright abandoned him, retreating into her own world and leaving him to fend for himself in the shadows of their home. She didn't care. Not really. The memories flooded back, each one like a dagger twisting in his chest. The nights spent sitting alone at the dinner table, staring at the cold, greasy takeout she'd ordered without a second thought. The faint scent of stale food lingering in the air as he ate in silence. No warmth, no comfort, just the hollow clatter of his chopsticks against the plastic container. She never joined him, never asked him how his day had gone or offered a single word of encouragement. She was always too busy, too distracted, too indifferent. He'd hear her muffled voice through the thin walls of their home, laughing on phone calls with friends, discussing trivial things that seemed so far removed from the hell he endured every day. He remembered the empty platitude she'd toss his way when she did bother to acknowledge him. "I'll be out late tonight. There's money on the counter if you want something, I'm sure. Things will get better." But things never got better. When the other kids mocked him, when Bakugo tormented him, when he came home battered and broken, she never asked why. She never hugged him or told him it would be okay. Instead, she'd glance at him briefly, her eyes skimming over the bruises like they were an inconvenience, and then go back to scrolling through her phone or disappearing into her bedroom. There were no bedtime stories, no gentle reassurances, no moments of love or pride. She didn't look at him like a mother should, she looked at him like a burden. And deep down, Izuku had known for years that's exactly what he was to her. A burden. An unwanted reminder of a life she hadn't chosen. She'd failed him. No, she hadn't even tried. She wasn't there when the world crushed his dreams. She wasn't there when he needed someone to tell him he mattered. She wasn't there when the endless tide of rejection and cruelty threatened to drown him. And now, she didn't even pretend to care. She existed in her own bubble, leaving him to rot in the silence of a home that felt more like a prison. Izuku's breathing grew heavier, his chest tightening as the anger bubbled up inside him, hot and relentless. His vision blurred, but not from tears. No, the tears had stopped long ago. He didn't cry anymore. Crying was for people who still believed someone might hear them. She abandoned me, he muttered, the words barely audible but laced with venom. She gave up on me without even trying. His thoughts spiraled, dark and unrelenting. If his own mother, the woman who brought him into this world, couldn't find it in herself to care, then why should anyone else? Why should he care? They abandoned me. They broke me. And now they expect me to save them. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, hollow and sharp. No, they didn't deserve salvation. They deserved to feel the pain, the loneliness, the despair that had been his constant companions for as long as he could remember. Society didn't need a hero. It needed to rot, to crumble, to suffer as he had suffered. Izuku's gaze drifted back to the robot, its cold red eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It was perfect, flawless in design and unwavering in loyalty. Unlike humans, it would never betray him, never hurt him, never mock him. It was his creation, his tool, his weapon. A twisted smile began to form on his lips as the pieces fell into place, one by one, in his mind. If I can't be their hero, then I'll be their nightmare. The idea sent a shiver down his spine, not of fear but of exhilaration. He could see it so clearly now, the fear in their eyes, the helplessness as they begged for mercy, the way they would finally look up at him not with scorn but with terror. Bakugo would fall first. His smug grin, his arrogance, his cruelty, it would all come crashing down. He'd make sure of it. He'd make Bakugo kneel. Then the rest of his classmates, each one more insignificant than the last. He'd SRP away their laughter, their confidence, until they were as broken as he had been. And All Might, oh All Might. Izuku's teeth clenched at the thought. He would make the great hero watch as his precious society burned, as his ideals crumbled to ash. He would show him what real power looked like. The robot stood silent and still, its presence both comforting and menacing. Izuku approached it, crouching to place a hand on its cold, metallic shoulder. He could feel the faint hum of its core, a steady rhythm that matched the dark resolve growing within him. They'll all suffer. I'll make them regret ever making me feel like this. And when I'm done, they'll know my name. They'll know who I am. He stepped back, staring at the machine, his servant, his enforcer, his tool of revenge. The cold, metallic eyes of the robot glowed eerily in the dim light of the basement. Izuku's lips curled into a sinister grin. If no one was going to save him, then he'd save himself. Not as the hero he once dreamed of becoming, but as something far more terrifying. If the world wanted a monster, then that's exactly what he would become. Chapter 2, New Beginning. Siege 1, you sure this is gonna work, kid? The gruff voice crackled through the comms, rough as gravel. It belonged to a man who clearly didn't enjoy leaving things to chance. It's going to work, a muffled deep voice replied sharply, his tone calm yet unyielding. Have a little faith, will you? His fingers didn't stop moving, flying across the keyboard in an intricate dance of precision. A grunt of reluctant agreement came through before the man turned to his crew. Positions. The group moved with practiced efficiency. One of them, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and a scruffy beard, stepped forward. His fingertips glowed a searing orange, faint wisps of smoke curling into the air as he pressed his hands against the concrete wall. The heat was immediate, the surface sizzling as if it were a slab of meat on a grill. Don't take all day, Melt, another thug said. This one was taller, broader, with sharp brown eyes that contrasted against his rough, unshaven face. When his ability activated, a faint shimmer surrounded them, muffling all sound. Sound shields up, he added, his voice subdued within the bubble of silence. Melt gave him a sharp look but didn't stop working. Almost done, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as the concrete softened under his superheated hands. He carefully carved out a large circle in the wall, the edges glowing faintly red as the material weakened. The gang leader stepped forward, towering over the others. He was a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar cutting across his stubbled jawline. A lit cigar smoldered between his teeth, smoke curling upward in lazy tendrils. He inspected the glowing outline before taking a long drag on his cigar. This better work, he muttered, his words accompanied by a plume of smoke. He reeled his fist back, muscles bulging under his tattered jacket. With a grunt of exertion, he drove his fist forward with devastating force. The section of the wall blasted inward, landing with a resounding thud as dust and debris filled the air. The crew moved in without hesitation, slipping through the breach like shadows. Meanwhile, outside the robot stood guard. Outside, the so-called creepy robot remained motionless. Its sleek, metallic frame gleamed under the faint streetlights, its eyes glowing an unblinking red. It scanned the area with cold precision, its presence an unspoken warning to anyone foolish enough to approach. Inside the van, a figure sat, hunched over his laptop, bathed in the glow of the screen. His fingers moved with surgical precision, dismantling the bank's security systems layer by layer. Each slide of the keys was calculated, efficient, a testament to the mind behind the machine. Disable the cameras, bypass the alarms, reroute the silent signal, he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of his focus. It was only a matter of time till Digital Fortress crumbled under his control. He spoke into the comms, his voice clipped but steady. You're clear to move forward. Security is offline. Just keep your end clean. The leader's voice came back, gruff but satisfied. Good work, kid. Now let's make sure this payout's worth the effort. Outside, the robot's glowing eyes dimmed for a brief second before reigniting, scanning the deserted street with unwavering vigilance. Nothing would disturb its young MSDR's work. The criminals did their thing. Melt and Big Smoke moved to the bank vault, the former melting the reinforced steel while the latter used his overwhelming strength to tear the softened metal apart. The edges glowed faintly as the vault door yielded. Meanwhile, Mute ensured that not even a whisper escaped their operation, his shimmering sound barrier silencing the cacophony of destruction. They moved quickly, shoving stacks of cash into duffel bags until their arms ached under the weight. Sweat trickled down their faces, but their pace never faltered. The robot remained stationed at the breach in the wall, its glowing crimson eyes scanning the darkened street with cold precision. Once the gang was loaded with as much loot as they could carry, they began their retreat, slipping through the breach like shadows. The robot hadn't moved, standing sentinel, an unmoving guard dog waiting for its MSDR's command. As the group emerged, their escape was abruptly interrupted. Halt, villains. The shout cut through the tension like a knife, and the group froze for a heartbeat. Standing a few meters away was a hero, his garish costume bathed in the glow of the streetlights. His outfit was a patchwork of clashing colors, neon green and bright yellow, and a chest emblem resembling a lightning bolt that seemed more decorative than functional. A bulky utility belt hung around his waist, weighed down by pouches, and a mask with overly large goggles obscured his face. He radiated the overeager energy of someone punching well above their weight class. Your evil doings, and the hero didn't even get the chance to finish his dramatic declaration. Goddamn. Big Smoke whistled, his gravelly voice carrying a hint of amusement as he stared at the motionless hero. Guess you're not just bolts and screws after all, huh? The robot turned its glowing eyes toward him, its expressionless face somehow conveying disdain. It lingered for a moment, then turned and strode toward the waiting van, its metallic footsteps echoing in the silence. Big Smoke let out a low chuckle, exhaling a puff of smoke from his cigar. Creepy little bastard, he muttered under his breath before motioning for the rest of the crew to follow. The group piled into the van, its engine rumbling to life as it sped off into the night, leaving behind the crumbled wall, the unconscious hero, and the eerie silence of a job well done. 20 million, huh? Not bad, Big Smoke muttered, twirling a thick wad of cash in his hands, his voice gravelly but smug. His eyes glinted with satisfaction, but his fingers didn't stop counting the money, methodically flicking bills as he spoke. Melt's eyes lit up and he cracked a grin. I get the biggest cut, right? He jabbed a finger at the pile of cash, practically bouncing on his heels with excitement. I did the real work. Melting through the vault was no joke. Before he could say another word, Big Smoke's heavy hand smacked the back of his head, knocking his hat askew. Hell no. Big Smoke's voice was cold and authoritative, eyes narrowing. All you did was melt some DMN walls. The real heavy lifting was me making sure we had an escape, keeping the team in check. And I'm the DMN leader here, so I take the biggest share. He pulled out 8 million from the stack, letting the bills flutter in his palm as if the money was secondary to the power he commanded. Melt scowled, but Big Smoke didn't care. He tossed a glance at the figure, who stood silently, his posture straight but relaxed. The figure's appearance was striking, a long brown trench coat, worn over a tactical camo army uniform. The dark colors of the uniform were broken up with jagged, aggressive patterns of red and black, hinting at military precision, but the coat gave him an air of mystery. The red helmet that covered his head was sleek and angular, its lenses glowing white, hiding his expression entirely. His boots, heavy and sturdy, were worn for practicality, reinforced for combat but still maintaining a fluidity in his movements. His entire appearance was one that commanded attention but also hinted at a man who had no longing to be noticed. Big Smoke shot him a casual nod. And we wouldn't have gotten Jack done without this guy's help. The figure barely looked up as Big Smoke handed him 6 million with a smirk. The figure didn't flinch, didn't smile. He just counted the bills, every motion precise and deliberate before he slipped the money into his case, the same one that always housed his laptop. His eyes remained hidden behind the mask, unreadable, giving no indication of what was going through his mind. Pleasure doing business, Metal. Let's go, he said coolly, his voice flat. He turned, heading for the exit, and Metal followed. With a low hum of mechanical power, Metal fired up his jet thruster. He grabbed the figure's arm in a swift motion, lifting him off the ground as he shot into the air, the roar of the engines loud and powerful as they sped into the night. Mute, his eyes narrowed, watched the spectacle from the corner, still not speaking. How the hell did he even make that thing? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else, but the question hung in the air. Big Smoke took another long drag from his cigar, blowing out a thick cloud of smoke, his face twisted into a grin. Not my DMN problem. He did his part, that's all that matters. He flicked the ash off his cigar with a sharp snap of his wrist. Melt, still agitated, crossed his arms, eyes flicking nervously between Big Smoke and the sky where the figure and Metal disappeared. Are you sure we should just let him leave like that? We all saw that thing take out a hero in, like 3 seconds. His voice was tinged with unease now, his bravado fading in the face of the uncertainty. Big Smoke snorted, his grin widening. Are you gonna keep yapping, Melt, or are you gonna come get your DMN pay? He stepped forward, pushing the cash toward Melt with a dismissive flick. Get over it. We're in this together. You're not paid to think, you're paid to follow orders. Melt grumbled under his breath but grabbed his share, looking like he wanted to argue more but knew better than to push it. Big Smoke didn't tolerate weakness and Melt wasn't about to test him. The tension lingered for a moment longer before Big Smoke's deep voice broke the silence again, rougher now. All right, that's enough. Let's get the hell out of here before the heroes figure out what hit him. They landed in a secluded alleyway a fair distance from the scene of the crime. Metal's ionic thruster, designed to muffle its output during low-speed flight, allowed them to arrive unnoticed. The figure moved with purpose, their trench coat brushing against the walls as they made their way to the back of a specific nondescript house. Reaching a basement window, they slipped inside with practiced ease. Metal followed, its movements uncanny. Despite its frame, the robot contorted with mechanical precision, slipping through the narrow opening as if it were designed for it. Once inside, the figure wasted no time. They shed the brown trench coat, revealing the black and red tactical camo uniform beneath. The uniform quickly followed, discarded for an All Might-themed t-shirt and a pair of worn brown shorts. With a deliberate motion, they reached up to their helmet, pressing a concealed latch at the base. A soft hiss escaped as the seal broke, air decompressing. They lifted the helmet away, revealing a head of messy green hair, damp with sweat from the day's events. Izuku Midoriya placed the helmet gently on a nearby table before crouching to open a hidden compartment in the wall. Carefully, he stashed away his tactical gear, ensuring everything was perfectly concealed. Finally, he opened his case, revealing neat stacks of 10,000 yen bills packed tightly inside. A smirk spread across his face as he picked up one of the bundles, flipping through the bills with his thumb. Crime doesn't pay, All Might, he muttered, his tone dripping with mockery. The words hung in the air, the irony almost palpable as the faint hum of metal systems buzzed in the background. Breaking news. In the early hours of the morning, Mustafu's Central Commercial Bank became the target of a daring heist, a female reporter announced as the camera focused on the scene. Police cordons surrounded the bank, and investigators worked tirelessly under floodlights. Authorities confirmed that the villains carved an enormous hole into the bank's walls and vault, utilizing what appears to be advanced technology or meta abilities. With no eyewitnesses due to the timing of the crime, the exact methods remain unclear. However, they made off with an estimated 20 million yen in cash. Zap, the sole hero who responded, was severely injured during the confrontation. Based on the evidence left behind, investigators believe he was caught off guard by a highly coordinated ambush. His condition remains stable but critical. As questions mount, the citizens of Mustafu are left wondering, who are these villains? How dangerous are they? And are our heroes capable of standing against this level of threat? Stay tuned to Mustafa City News for further developments. Tragedy struck again today as the pro-hero Valiance was critically injured during a sudden attack, a news anchor reported gravely. Footage displayed Valiance being rushed into a hospital, surrounded by a team of medical professionals. Valiance, known for his meta ability, Armor Pulse, which generates powerful energy barriers, faced off against a group of villains during a high-stakes incident. Authorities believe the attackers exploited his reliance on concentration by overwhelming him with distractions, before employing sulfuric acid that degraded his barriers, leaving him vulnerable. The pro-hero is now in a medically induced coma, with doctors uncertain about the timeline of his recovery. This devastating turn of events has shaken the community, sparking concerns about the escalating frequency and intensity of villain attacks. Downtown Mustafa was left in chaos earlier today after a destructive attack by a group of villains, a field reporter stated, their voice competing with the roar of fire engines and sirens in the background. The assault left multiple buildings damaged and vehicles overturned, with several explosions reported. Witnesses described the villains using meta abilities that combine psychokinesis to devastating effect. First responders have confirmed 7 injuries, with 2 victims in critical condition. Despite the efforts of heroes like Emberheart and Gravitas, the villains managed to escape, leaving destruction in their wake. The camera lingered on the debris-strewn streets, where emergency crews worked tirelessly. This marks the 3rd major villain incident in just 2 weeks, leaving residents shaken and questioning the effectiveness of our heroes against such a coordinated onslaught. How long can Mustafa endure this rising wave of villainy? Tsukachi turned off the office television with a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered. "I know, right?" Yuhari chimed in, crossing her arms as she leaned against the desk. Villains usually scatter the moment All Might so much as breathes in their direction. Her exasperation matched his. "It doesn't add up," Tsukachi said, lacing his fingers together as he rested his chin on them. His brow furrowed deeply. "Villains aren't supposed to be this coordinated. Something's wrong, very wrong." "Tell me about it," Yuhari agreed, brushing a strand of mint-colored hair from her face. "The intel we've been getting paints a troubling picture." "Anything from the undercover agents?" Tsukachi asked, glancing up. "Yeah," Yuhari said, her voice turning grim. "Turns out there's someone out there feeding villains high-level information stuff about hero patrol routes, response times, the works. Whoever they are, they're careful. We can't trace them. But judging by how these attacks are escalating, I'd say this person isn't just smart. They're terrifyingly smart." Tsukachi's fingers drummed against the desk. "A villain with a brain that's never good." Yuhari nodded. "Oh, and there's more. Zap came to a little while ago." "He did." Tsukachi straightened in his chair. "What did he say?" "Well," she hesitated as if weighing the best way to break the news. "Let's start with the most important thing. Zap wasn't taken out by a villain." "What?" Tsukachi blinked. "Then what was it?" "A robot." "A robot." His voice rose with disbelief. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "And not just any robot. Zap said it was DMN faster than anything he's ever encountered. Took him out before he could even react." Tsukachi leaned back in his chair, his expression bewildered. "Since when do villains have the resources for something like that?" "Beats me," Yuhari shrugged. "But there's more. Zap said there were 3 others with it, just regular street thugs. No way they're the ones who built something that advanced." "You think they stole it?" Tsukachi asked, frowning. "No reports of theft from any robotics companies," Yuhari said, tapping her finger against her coffee cup. "So if I had to guess, someone a villain built that thing. And not just anyone. Someone who knows what they're doing." Tsukachi's voice dropped, a note of unease creeping in. "Could it be the same person feeding the villains intel?" Yuhari shrugged again, this time with a faint smirk. "Maybe. But hey, if it is, we can ask them in person once we catch them." "Catch them," Tsukachi repeated, leaning forward, his tone dark. "If they keep this up, we might not have the luxury of waiting that long." Yuhari gave him a sidelong glance, her smile fading. "You're not wrong. This isn't just a villain problem anymore, it's starting to feel like something bigger." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Tsukachi exhaled sharply, already dreading what tomorrow's headlines might bring. Bakugo was confused. It was an alien emotion for him, one that didn't sit right. He prided himself on being in control, on knowing his own mind and actions with unwavering certainty. But now, for the first time in a long time, he was stumped. It was Deku. The nerd had been acting weird lately. Gone was his permanently hunched-over posture and those nervous, flinching reactions that Bakugo had grown so used to. There was something different about him, something Bakugu couldn't put his finger on but hated all the same. Confidence. No, that couldn't be it. As if that DMN nerd could ever stand on equal ground with him. Bakugu clicked his tongue, irritation simmering beneath his skin. He wasn't about to let this slide. If Dekki thought he could start walking around with his head held high, thinking he was better than him, he had another thing coming. Stomping through the halls of the school, Bakugu's crimson eyes scanned the sea of students, searching. His frustration grew with every second Deku wasn't in sight, until finally as he stepped outside he spotted him. There he was, just ahead, about to walk through the school gates. Oi Dku. Bakugu's voice tore through the air like a thunderclap. Midoriya flinched at the sound, though Bakugu noticed the delay. Usually the nerd was a trembling mess by now. Midoriya turned, his face wearing the same nervous expression Bakugu was used to. Oh hi Kaken, he stammered, his voice light, though something about it felt off, calmer than usual maybe. Bakugu marched toward him, his jaw tight. Shut up, he barked as he stopped right in front of Midoriya, his glare sharp enough to cut. You think you're better than me, huh, you DMN nerd? Midoriya blinked, confusion flickering in his wide, green eyes. What? No, of course not, don't give me that CRP. Bakugu interrupted, shoving him hard. Midoriya staggered and fell to the ground, his bag slipping from his shoulder. Bakugu felt a brief pang of surprise. There was barely any resistance. Grabbing Midoriya by the collar, Bakugu hauled him up with one hand, his scowl deepening. You think I haven't noticed? Walking around like you own the place. Acting like you're hot SHT all of a sudden. His palm began to glow, a dangerous orange light flickering as tiny explosions crackled against his skin. First you apply to you, now you're strutting around like some kind of hero. I think it's time I reminded you of your place, Deku. Kaken, wait. Midoriya barely got the words out before Bakugu slammed an explosion into his side, sending him sprawling across the pavement. The sound of the blast echoed through the courtyard, drawing the attention of nearby students. Heads turned, but no one stepped in. No one even called for a teacher. Instead, phones came out and the students began recording, some whispering to each other, others laughing under their breath. Midoriya groaned, clutching his side, but Bakugu was on him again in an instant. He kicked him hard, sending the smaller boy rolling a few feet. Pathetic. Bakugu spat, stalking after him. That's all you'll ever be. A useless, crippled loser. You hear me? Midoriya struggled to push himself up, his hands trembling against the concrete. Kaken. Shut your demon mouth. Bakugu's voice was sharp, filled with venom. He grabbed Midoriya by the shirt again, lifting him halfway before throwing another explosion at point-blank range. The force sent Midoriya crashing back to the ground, a strangled cry escaping him. The crowd laughed, some cheering Bakugu on like spectators at a gladiator match. The videos kept rolling and not a single hand reached out to help. Bakugu's breath was heavy, his chest rising and falling as he loomed over Midoriya. You're nothing, Deku, he hissed, his tone low and dangerous. You hear me? Nothing. Stay in your DMN lane before I make sure you never get up again. Midoriya didn't answer. He lay there, coughing, his body curled in on itself as though trying to shield against further attacks. For a moment, Bakugu stood there, fists clenched, explosions still sparking faintly at his palms. Then with a final scoff he turned away. Pathetic, he muttered under his breath, shoving his hands into his pockets as he walked off. The crowd dispersed slowly, still murmuring and giggling as they pocketed their phones. Midoriya lay sprawled on the ground, his fingers twitching as they dug weakly into the rough concrete. His chest heaved with every breath, but his wide, unblinking eyes betrayed more than pain. In their green depths, something dark flickered hate. Pure, unfiltered, calculating rage. No one stepped forward to help him. They never did. Their laughter and jeers still echoed in his ears like nails scraping against his skull. But Midoriya pushed himself up slowly, painfully but surely. His muscles burned and his hands trembled, but the hate burning inside him was a better support than any helping hand could ever be. He didn't expect them to help. They were every single one of them. The thought made his lip curl slightly as he staggered upright, brushing debris from his scorched uniform. They'll regret it. Every single one of them. I'll make them wish they'd stayed rotting in the trash pit they call their mother's WMB. The thought repeated itself like a mantra as he trudged home, his steps heavy but deliberate. When he opened the door to his apartment, the dim, quiet space greeted him with its usual emptiness. His mother wasn't home, not that he expected her to be. He shrugged his bag off his shoulder and let it drop onto the couch without a second glance, heading straight to his room. Once inside, he peeled off his scorched uniform, grimacing at the state of it. He tossed it aside, pulling on an old shirt and sweatpants, then made his way to the downstairs staircase. He approached the far wall, running his fingers along the baseboard until they found a small, concealed latch. With a soft click, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a fingerprint scanner. Midoriya pressed his thumb against the scanner, waiting for the quiet beep before the wall itself slid inward, revealing a narrow door to the basement. He stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind him and locking it with a heavy bolt. The familiar hum of machinery greeted him as he descended into the dimly lit space. His sanctuary. The basement was cramped but organized, every surface covered with blueprints, scattered tools and half-assembled gadgets. In the corner, Metal stood tall and imposing, its red optics flickering as it booted up. "Hey Metal," Midoriya greeted, his voice calm, almost casual. Metal's optics locked onto him for a moment before giving a single affirmative nod. Midoriya didn't need more of a response. The robot's presence was a comfort in itself. He walked to his workbench, where two semi-complete pistols rested amidst a mess of tools and components. They were sleek and futuristic, their designs clearly unconventional. Sliding onto the stool, Midoriya picked up one of the pistols and a small screwdriver, examining the internals with a critical eye. He muttered to himself as he worked, his fingers steady despite the aches in his body. The superconductors were his first priority. Using a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, he adjusted the thin, supercooled wires within the pistol's core, ensuring they aligned perfectly with the energy node. Any deviation could disrupt the delicate balance of the weapon's power output. Satisfied, he moved on to the electromagnetic coils. He unscrewed the protective casing, revealing tightly wound copper coils wrapped around a tungsten alloy core. His brow furrowed as he noticed a slight misalignment in the winding. He retrieved a micro-adjustment tool and painstakingly realigned the coils, ensuring the magnetic field would remain stable during firing. Once the internals were complete, he turned his attention to the outer casing. The alloy he'd chosen, a custom tungsten steel blend, was heat-resistant and durable but notoriously difficult to work with. Using a precision welding tool, he carefully fused the final pieces of the casing together, ensuring the seams were smooth and flawless. After an hour of meticulous work, the first pistol gleamed in his hand, its sleek design practically vibrating with latent energy. He tested the grip, adjusted a few settings on the control panel near the trigger, and nodded in satisfaction. He glanced over at Metal, who stood silently, its glowing optics watching him like a sentinel. The basement was silent except for the hum of metal and the quiet clink of his tools. Midoriya's mind was a storm of thoughts, each one focused on a singular goal. With every screw tightened and every adjustment made, he felt the weight of his rage sharpen into something useful. Soon, he thought. Very soon. They'd all regret underestimating him. Almost done, Midoriya muttered, setting the pistol down and reaching for the second one. Before his fingers could reach it, Metal's metallic hand darted forward, grabbing the unfinished pistol off the table. Startled, Midoriya blinked, watching as Metal held the weapon with surprising care. The little robot's red optics flickered, and it pointed to the pistol and then to itself with a precise motion. "You want to do it for me?" Izuku asked, his curiosity piqued. Metal nodded, its small frame giving the gesture an endearing quality that tugged at Midoriya's lips. He couldn't help but chuckle softly. "All right, knock yourself out," he said, leaning back slightly and gesturing for Metal to proceed. The robot wasted no time, stepping forward with purposeful, mechanical movements. Despite its size, its hands moved with an almost unnatural precision as it began to carefully handle the weapon, its servos emitting soft, rhythmic whirs. Midoriya watched for a moment, a faint smile playing on his lips. For all the challenges he'd faced building metal, moments like this reminded him why he kept pushing forward. There was something oddly charming about the sight of the robot, standing just over 3 feet tall, diligently working as if it had something to prove. "Guess you've got this under control," Izuku muttered to himself before shifting his focus to other parts of his workbench, content to let Metal handle the task. He couldn't help but think back to the robot. Do not let its size fool you. This robot is a killing machine. He would never forget that night. It was one of his first gigs, so the gang he was helping didn't take him or Metal seriously. But when the job was done and it was time for him to get his share, "Well, we don't really have to pay you, do we?" The leader sneered, flipping a knife in his hand. His voice dripped with mockery. "What if we just kill you instead and keep all the loot? I mean, you don't look that tough hiding behind that toy of yours." The gang chuckled darkly, the room suddenly crackling with tension. Izuku's brow furrowed as he noticed subtle changes, the leader's muscles twitching unnaturally, veins bulging as his skin darkened to a hardened, stone-like texture. What? Izuku sputtered, genuine disbelief creeping into his voice. If it weren't for me, you idiots would've failed this job. You can't just kill me. Oh yeah, one of the other thugs jeered. This one's hand glowed with an eerie green light. A sickly aura radiated from his fingers. And who's gonna stop us? You backstabbing BSTRDS, he shouted. The leader laughed, lunging at him with a roar. Not our fault you're an easy Lee, he never finished. In the blink of an eye, Metal moved. One moment, the robot was beside Izuku, seemingly inert. The next, it hovered before the gang leader, its crimson eyes blazing like twin infernos. There was no warning. No hesitation. Metal's clawed hand shot out, gripping the leader's face with unyielding force. For a fraction of a second, there was a stunned silence, then, with a single brutal motion, the robot tore the man's head clean from his shoulders. For a moment, the room was frozen. Then a scream pierced the air. Metal's head swiveled sharply toward the source, a thug fumbling backward, terror etched on his face. The robot's jet thruster activated with a sharp whoosh, propelling it forward faster than the man could react. Metal's claw clamped onto the thug's jaw, shattering it with a sickening crunch, leaving it a mangled mess of flesh and bone before tearing it off completely. The man's scream turned to a wet gurgle as Metal's fingers drove upward through his palate, puncturing his skull. The thug's lifeless body crumpled to the floor, his bulging eyes staring blankly into nothingness. What the hell is this thing? Another thug screamed, his voice cracking. Desperation overtook him as he unleashed a burst of energy radiating from his body like a shockwave. But it didn't matter. Metal didn't flinch. Instead, its arm transformed with a seamless mechanical hum, shifting into a sleek plasma blaster. The weapon hummed ominously before releasing a searing bolt of energy. The plasma struck the thug square in the chest, punching a cauterized hole clean through his torso. He was dead on the spot. Hovering slightly, Metal turned its attention to the remaining two. The next plasma shot rang out, striking an arm and severing it instantly. The man screamed, clutching the smoking stump, only to be silenced by a second shot to the head. His skull vaporized in an instant, leaving behind a smoldering crater where his face had been. The final thug dropped his weapon and ran, a panicked, incoherent stream of pleas spilling from his lips. And no, please. God, turn it off. Turn it off. Metal didn't shoot. Instead, it hovered ominously, rising higher, its crimson eyes glowing brighter as arcs of red electricity crackled along its frame. The soft hum of its thruster filled the room, a sinister counterpoint to the muffled sobbing of the fleeing man. Then it curled into a compact ball, spinning rapidly. The red arcs of electricity intensified, illuminating the room with bursts of light. In an instant, the spinning blur launched forward, crashing into the thug with devastating force. The room fell silent once more. Metal uncurled, its glowing eyes scanning the carnage, its sensors confirming that no threats remained. Izuku stood frozen, his body trembling. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. It had all happened too fast, so fast that he hadn't even had the chance to speak, to stop it. His stomach churned at the gruesome sight, bile rising in his throat. On that night, Izuku truly understood Metal was not tethered to the fragile constructs of morality. It existed beyond right or wrong, a creation of pure purpose, unchained by conscience or hesitation. Yet here it was, this cold, unfeeling machine trying its best to aid him like a loyal puppy. Despite the maelstrom of emotions that surged every time he thought back to that night, the fear, the pity, the trauma, there was something else buried beneath the weight of it all. Pride. It clawed its way to the surface, persistent and undeniable. Pride that something he had practically rebuilt with his own hands was strong enough to defend him when no one else could. Pride that something as powerful as Metal would show unwavering loyalty to him. Pride that, for once in his life, someone who had dared to look down on him had paid the price for their arrogance. They were just street thugs, he thought, a whisper of justification in his mind. Who would miss them anyway? The rationalization tasted bitter, but it wasn't untrue. He shook his head as if to dislodge the thought, focusing instead on Metal's frame as it worked with precise, mechanical efficiency. Its crimson eyes glowed faintly, an eerie yet oddly comforting light in the dim room. Izuku's thoughts were interrupted by a tap on his shoulder. He blinked, startled, and turned to see Metal holding out the completed pistol. Ha! Already? He stammered, bewildered. His gaze darted between the pistol and the robot, disbelief etched on his face. You're kidding, right? That should have taken an hour at least? But of course it shouldn't surprise him. Metal's neural circuit system operated like an advanced quantum computer. While Izuku had painstakingly assembled the first pistol step by step, Metal had been analyzing every movement, every decision, breaking it down into countless possibilities and optimizing the process. It had probably figured out the best method before Izuku had even finished the first screw. A wry smile tugged at Izuku's lips as he let out a soft chuckle. "Keep this up and you might just take my job," he mused, half joking. To his surprise, Metal reacted, or at least it seemed to. The robot shifted back ever so slightly, its rigid frame almost recoiling at the suggestion. "Relax, I'm just kidding," Izuku said quickly, waving a hand dismissively. To his bewilderment, Metal's posture adjusted as though it had relaxed. Izuku stared, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. Despite its cold, deadly exterior, this machine, the same one capable of unimaginable violence, was oddly expressive. It didn't have a face, no mouth to frown or eyes to widen, yet it communicated through subtle movements, small tilts of its head, or the way it hesitated ever so slightly. It was endearing. Izuku ran a hand through his hair, exhaling softly. "Man, you're full of surprises, aren't you?" he muttered. A small, fleeting thought crossed his mind, one he didn't dare voice. "Maybe you're more than just a machine after all." "All right," Izuku muttered, his voice carrying a mix of anticipation and determination. "Testing time." He grabbed the two freshly assembled pistols, their sleek, polished surfaces glinting faintly under the dim workshop lights. Striding across the room, he stopped in front of his makeshift testing zone, a battered mannequin standing stiffly against the far wall. Taped to its face was a crude photo of Bakugo, a mocking grin frozen in time. Izuku's lips curled into a wry smile as he raised one of the sleek, newly finished pistols. Its barrel hummed softly with latent energy, the faint glow of the core visible through its sleek, reinforced casing. "Let's see what you can do." He took aim at the mannequin across the room, its head adorned with a mock picture of Bakugo's face. A flick of his thumb adjusted the power setting. "Low power," he muttered, steadying his grip. The pistol emitted a sharp whir as its supercharged energy cell activated, directing power to the electrode system within. A bolt of plasma, no larger than a marble, burst from the barrel with a crackle, SRNG through the air like a miniature comet. The bolt struck the mannequin's right leg, melting a clean hole through the plastic. Wisps of smoke and the acrid scent of burnt synthetic wafted through the air. "Not bad," Izuku remarked, his emerald eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Medium power," he adjusted the dial again. The pistol's magnetic coils realigned, and a larger plasma capsule was loaded into the chamber from the magazine. The weapon whined louder this time, a brief charge building before release. The resulting plasma bolt was brighter and denser, slamming into the mannequin's chest. The impact left a smoldering crater, shoving the dummy backward with the force. Izuku's smirk deepened as he turned the dial one final time. "All right, high power." The pistol's core roared to life, its energy cell pouring immense power into the chamber. The magnetic containment field compressed the plasma into a volatile, superheated projectile. Izuku aimed carefully at the head, the picture of Bakugo's mocking grin. The weapon discharged with a thunderous crack. The plasma bolt, now a searing mass of energy, lit the room with a fiery glow. Even before impact, the sheer heat radiating from the projectile vaporized the paper photo, causing the edges to curl into ash. When the bolt finally struck, the mannequin's head disintegrated, molten plastic dripping onto the floor. The bolt continued its trajectory, slamming into the steel wall behind and leaving a sizzling hole that glowed red-hot around the edges. For a moment, Izuku stood in silence, his heart pounding with exhilaration as he admired the destruction. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a masterpiece. The science behind the pistol replayed in his mind, a culmination of countless hours of tinkering and problem-solving. Each shot was powered by a supercharged energy cell, which generated plasma through an electric arc. The plasma was then stabilized within capsules housed in the magazine, each designed to withstand immense heat and pressure. When fired, electromagnetic coils focused the plasma into a tight, devastating bolt, with the modular muzzle fine-tuning its shape and power. The cooling system ensured the weapon remained operational, no matter how intense the fight. He lowered the pistol, the barrel still faintly glowing from the heat, and let out a soft, satisfied chuckle. "Now that's what I'm talking about," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The scene before him wasn't just a testament to his intellect. It was proof that he could stand against those who were born with advantages he could only dream of. "This," he murmured, glancing at the pistols in his hands, This should even the playing field. Don't get him wrong though. Izuku had no doubts about Metal's abilities to protect him. The robot had already proven itself to be a near unstoppable force. But that didn't mean he could afford to depend on it for everything. Relying solely on Metal was a crutch, and Izuku Midoriya wasn't the kind of person to let himself be carried. No, he needed to stand on his own 2 feet. He needed to be strong enough to defend himself when it mattered. The pistols were only the beginning, the first step in his journey to becoming someone who could fight back. A faint spark of determination flared in his eyes as he turned his gaze toward the other project in his workshop. Sitting on a cluttered workbench, surrounded by scattered tools and notes, was his next creation, an incomplete pair of gauntlets. They were rough, still just prototypes version 0, as he liked to call them. But they represented potential. If he could finish them, if they worked the way he envisioned, they would be more than just weapons. They'd be an extension of his will, a way to even the odds against abilities far beyond his own. Izuku ran his fingers over the cold, unfinished metal, his mind already racing with ideas for improvements. These gauntlets would be a game-changer. Combined with the pistols, they'd make him more than capable of holding his own. But tools and weapons alone wouldn't be enough. He knew that. With a sigh, Izuku set the pistols down and stepped away from the workbench. His eyes drifted to the corner of the room where a modest, makeshift gym awaited him. Dumbbells, a worn-out punching bag, and a treadmill were crammed into the small space, each piece of equipment bearing the marks of relentless use. If I'm going to keep this up, he muttered to himself, rolling his shoulders, I need to be ready for more than just the lab work. He stepped onto the treadmill and began his routine, the rhythmic pounding of his footsteps soon filling the air. Sweat quickly beaded on his brow as he pushed himself harder, faster. His muscles ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. If he was going to keep up with these late-night activities building weapons, involving himself with dangerous criminals at the dead of night, he needed to be fit enough to handle the physical strain. As the minutes stretched into hours, the faint hum of metal working in the background mingled with the sound of Izuku's training. Izuku used to be motivated to train by his longing to be a hero, to save others. Now he's motivated by something that was brewing in him for so long. A single word is what finally let it out. Hey. Junk was having a good night. Mug some helpless sucker, put a bullet in her, then kick back with a smoke and a drink. This was the life. Simple. No complications. He'd done it 100 times before and it never got old. His ability, scrap, was as fitting as his name. He could gather and manipulate junk, scrap metal, broken bits of anything, making it bend to his will. When someone crossed him, all he had to do was throw a few discarded pieces of trash together and turn it into a weapon. A handful of scrap could become a spiked bat, a knife, a trap, whatever he needed. And tonight, he just used it to pick the pocket of a naive woman, leaving her dead on the cold pavement for his entertainment. "Ha, Papa's gonna eat good tonight," Junk muttered, counting the crumpled bills in his hand. A smug smirk stretched across his unshaven face as he flicked his cigarette into the street. He was living the dream, dirty, violent, but it paid well. Then, as he stood in the alleyway, an eerie sensation crept up his spine. Huh. His head snapped up. He could have sworn he felt eyes on him. A subtle pressure in the air, a presence something was watching. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest as he tried to shake it off. Creepy? His voice was thick with indifference, but the pit in his stomach grew. That's enough, Creepy Alley, for one night. He started walking, one foot in front of the other, trying to dismiss the feeling. The faint sound of his boots clicking against the damp concrete echoed louder than they should have in the silence. He'd heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. But no one spoke about it openly. How she kept slipping past every search, every trap, every bounty. Junk didn't care. He wasn't stupid enough to go looking for trouble. Nightmare. That's what they called her. At least, that's the closest anyone had come to describing what she was. The who never seemed to matter. No one could agree on the details. Some said she was a woman, others claimed she was something else entirely. A phantom. A shadow in the underworld. But it wasn't just her violence that terrified the criminal world, it was her presence. No one knew how she did it. No one knew how she found her victims. But if you caught her eye, it was over. Junk's pace quickened, his confidence starting to crack. The feeling, it wasn't going away. It was creeping closer, tightening around his chest like a vice. He couldn't shake it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. There was something there. Something in the dark, just out of sight. And then, for the briefest of moments, it stopped. The alley grew even quieter. Too quiet. The sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional shout seemed to fade, swallowed up by a suffocating silence. Junk felt the air grow thick, heavier, almost as though it were pressing down on him. His footsteps echoed in the stillness. They felt off like they weren't his own. And then that feeling of being watched, no hunted, grew unbearable. He could almost feel her presence now, right behind him. No footsteps, no sound, just the suffocating weight of her gaze. His heart started to race. The walls of the alley seemed to close in around him, the darkness pulling at the edges of his vision. He froze, dead still. His body locked up like his muscles had forgotten how to move. Fear crept in, crawling under his skin, making him feel like he was suffocating. There was nothing but the overwhelming sensation that something was there, watching. And then it came, the softest sound, so faint he could barely hear it, like a breath against the back of his neck. The temperature around him dropped. The feeling of being hunted was all-encompassing now. His legs refused to move, his chest tight with terror. He tried to look over his shoulder, but the darkness seemed to stretch further than he remembered, a void of shadows that swallowed everything around him. His breath hitched. It was her. And he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that there was no escape. And then he saw it, a figure cloaked in shadow, a twisted silhouette, frilled dress of black and red, dripping with dread. In life, everyone has their time. Their moment, whether horrific or serene. Twin tails swayed like a clock's ticking chime, marking the rhythm of his fleeting time. That is the principle that binds all things together, the silent force that governs the dance of the universe time. It flows unchecked, indifferent to the desires or struggles of those caught within it. The alley stretched, a trap unseen, the shadows themselves waiting with bated breath. The barrel gleamed, sharp and keen, but time is well known for waiting for no one. That unfair, don't you think? In its cruelty, it moves with no hesitation, sweeping all who stand in its path. Fleeing is futile, fate's seal is penned, once your moment is upon you, you are no more than a name in the books of the inevitable. Time ticks forward to your bitter end, not with malice but with cold, unfeeling precision. But that's how it is, isn't it? The relentless march of seconds and minutes, pulling each of us toward an end we cannot avoid. Unfortunate, perhaps, that some are claimed before their time, but again, that's how it is. Nothing most can do about it. The world spins, and all we can do is watch as our moment approaches, knowing deep down that it will come for us all. And then the shot rang out, sharp and final. A cruel punctuation to a life that thought it was beyond consequence. The thug stumbled, clutching his chest, but the agony was not merely physical. It was the kind of pain that transcended flesh and bone, the kind that echoed through his very soul. It was the unraveling of him. Time itself, that ever-constant force that bends and shapes the universe, had turned on him. Every fragment of his past, each fleeting moment of his present, and the long-forgotten possibilities of his future, every thread of his existence collapsed in on itself. His reality fractured, breaking into 1,000 pieces that twisted together in a single, excruciating instant. His consciousness splintered, overwhelmed by the weight of his own timeline folding in upon itself. The universe, bound by the relentless progression of time, could not bear such a distortion. The very fabric of his being tore asunder under the strain, and the rules that governed his existence became nothing more than a shattered dream. The man's body buckled, limbs contorting in unnatural angles, flesh warping like a star collapsing in on itself. Every cell, every molecule, screamed in agony as the very nature of his form disintegrated. And then the breaking point. A grotesque, violent eruption. A horrific testament to the power of time when it is warped and bent by malice. Flesh, bone, and memory scattered in a symphony of decay, the echoes of a life snuffed out before its time could truly run out. From the depths of the shadows, the figure in black and red lowered the smoking barrel. The sound of the shot still lingered, hanging in the air like a whispered warning. Silence followed, but it was a hollow silence, P-Argent with the presence of something far darker, far older. The weight of what had just transpired hung heavy, its implications lingering in the stillness. A faint giggle, soft and eerily innocent, broke the silence, sending a chill down whatever remained of the air. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring every second of the aftermath. In front of the crimson mess that was once a man, an orb, an unstable, pulsing sphere of distorted energy hovered above the remnants of his digestive system. It reached out, fingers delicate yet purposeful, as it grasped the orb and brought it to her mouth. The figure swallowed the orb whole, her smile twisted and knowing. And then, as swiftly as she had appeared, she was gone, vanishing into the night as if she had never been. Time is the driving force of the universe. It is the unseen hand that guides all things, that moves mountains and shapes destinies. But when wielded with malice, when twisted by those who know its true power, it can become something far darker. Something that unravels existence itself. Time is not always a friend. Chapter 3, New Beginning Siege 2. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending on such short notice, said Kenji, the chief of police, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. His canine features, sharp and alert, betrayed the gravity of the situation. I won't waste time with pleasantries, we have a pressing matter to address. He paused, holding up a thick file before distributing its contents among the assembled officials, detectives, and pro-heroes. As you may be aware, over the past 3 months, we've observed a disturbing trend. Villains are not only becoming more organized but are operating with unprecedented precision and intelligence. They've gained access to highly sensitive information, including police response times, hero patrol routes, detailed analyses of abilities, and even critical weaknesses. This is far beyond random chance or luck. The room grew tense as the gravity of his words sank in, the hum of whispered conversations beginning to ripple across the table. Kenji continued, his tone growing firmer. We've been chasing shadows for weeks, trying to identify how this information is being leaked. Our undercover agents, through painstaking work and no small amount of risk, have finally managed to pinpoint the source. He opened a second folder and carefully placed a photograph in the center of the table, rotating it so everyone could see. The image depicted a figure clad in a brown trench coat, a crimson helmet obscuring their face, and tactical camouflage completing their ominous appearance. This is the individual we believe to be the supplier, the one arming villains with intel and resources that should be impossible to obtain. So far we've been unable to identify them, but this much is clear. Their actions are orchestrated and deliberate. They've elevated villains from reckless criminals to strategic operators. If we don't neutralize this threat, the consequences could be catastrophic. Kenji glanced around the room, his sharp eyes meeting each attendee. We need all hands on deck for this one. Every department, every hero agency, our response must be unified and precise. This isn't just a breach of security, it's a direct assault on the foundation of our operations. He folded his arms, his gaze unyielding. Questions, strategies, and insights, I want them all. Let's begin. Pro-hero Midnight picked up the photograph slowly, her brow furrowing as she studied it. So, other than passing intel and wearing what looks like a second-rate Halloween costume, do we have anything else? Name. Abilities. She asked, her voice laced with skepticism as she squinted at the grainy, awkwardly angled photo. Kenji let out a sigh, his tail flicking with restrained frustration. Unfortunately, no. This is one of the only tangible pieces of evidence we have that the suspect even exists. Beyond testimonies from interrogations, they're practically a ghost. No fingerprints, no DNA, no slip-ups. As for their abilities, we're completely in the dark. Whether they're physically capable in combat is also unknown. What we do know is that they're brilliant. Dangerously brilliant. Midnight lowered the photo onto the table, her fingers lingering over its edge. Brilliant. They're passing out hero weaknesses like candy. This isn't brilliant, it's infuriating. Principal Nizu, the mouse-bear hybrid, spoke up from his seat with a measured tone. It's always tragic to see a mind of this caliber squandered in villainy, he said, a faint sadness in his voice. Detective Tsukachi, seated near the end of the table, raised his hand slightly. Sir, if I may, he began, addressing Kenji. Kenji nodded. Go ahead, Tsukachi. Tsukachi straightened in his seat. I'd like to add some additional information from a report filed by pro-hero Zap after the recent bank heist incident. Zap has fully recovered and provided his statement. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a neatly prepared file, which he handed to Kenji. According to Zap, it wasn't any of the criminals who incapacitated him. Kenji flipped through the report, his ears twitching. So who or what did? A robot, Tsukachi replied simply, the weight of his words hanging in the air. A what? Kenji asked, his brows furrowing. Are you sure Zap wasn't just dazed from the fight? Concussions can muddle memories. I considered that, Tsukachi admitted. But the details in his report were too specific. He described a machine highly advanced, precise, and fast enough to take him down before he could even react. If such a robot exists and is in the hands of a villain, this situation is far worse than we originally thought. Kenji exhaled sharply, his expression grim. And you're confident in this report? Tsukachi nodded firmly. Yes, sir. What's even more concerning is that no robotics company across the country has reported a theft. Which leads me to believe this wasn't stolen, it was built. By a villain. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the weight of his words settling heavily on everyone present. "There's no way," Kamui Woods finally said, crossing his arms defensively. "Villains are low-level some. They don't have the resources or the brains to create something that advanced." Tsukachi leaned forward, pointing at the photograph of the figure on the table. "And what about this one? If this suspect is smart enough to gather intel, analyze heroes to the letter, pinpoint weaknesses, and stay completely undetected, why should building a robot be out of their reach?" Kamui Woods frowned but said nothing. Midnight leaned back in her chair, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "If this person is capable of all that and has access to tech like this, we're not dealing with a run-of-the-mill villain anymore." Kenji nodded solemnly. "Exactly. Which is why this case demands our utmost focus. This isn't just another villain. This is someone with the potential to fundamentally alter the balance of power, and we can't afford to underestimate them." The tension in the room deepened as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. "So, what's the plan then?" Death Arms asked, his deep voice cutting through the tense silence. "A trap," Tsukachi said plainly, his tone calm but resolute. "A trap?" Kamui Woods echoed, his tone skeptical. Several murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. "Yes, a trap," Tsukachi repeated, scanning the room to ensure he had everyone's attention. "Here's the situation. In 2 months, a known villain named Lasher will be transported to Tartarus. Lasher isn't just a dangerous criminal, he's a high-ranking member of a particularly well-organized gang. A gang that has a lot to lose if their leader is taken off the board permanently." Nizu's sharp eyes gleamed as he leaned forward, steepling his tiny hands. "Ah, I see where this is going, Detective. Given their desperation, it's logical to assume the gang will attempt a rescue operation. And considering the complexity of such a mission, they'd likely seek the assistance of someone with strategic intelligence, someone who could orchestrate such an endeavor." "Exactly," Tsukachi replied with a nod, grateful for Nizu's quick grasp of the situation. "And based on everything we've gathered about this suspect, they fit the bill perfectly. If the gang is desperate enough to make a move, we can anticipate their actions and use that to draw our suspect into the open." Midnight tapped a finger against the table. "Okay, but how do we ensure the suspect takes the bait? They've stayed hidden this long, they're not going to walk into a trap unless it's worth the risk." Kenji chimed in, his voice steady. "That's why we'll be handling this operation in multiple layers. First, we'll use Lasher's transfer as the focal point. The route, timing, and security measures will be deliberately leaked through controlled channels, ones we know the gang monitors. But we'll carefully craft the leak to seem as though it's been discovered, not planted. That should make the intel appear genuine." Nizu nodded approvingly. "A clever move. If the information seems too pristine or too convenient, it might raise suspicions. By carefully introducing minor inconsistencies, perhaps through intercepted police chatter or a fabricated report, we can ensure the bait looks authentic." Tsukachi picked up from there. "Once the information is out, we'll enhance the appearance of vulnerability. The transport team will appear undermanned, and the route will seem poorly secured, at least on the surface. This should encourage the gang to make their move. What they won't know is that we'll have a second team lying in wait, heavily armed and strategically positioned to respond the moment the gang shows up." Kamui Woods crossed his arms, frowning. "And what about our suspect? If they're as intelligent as we think, they won't just show up guns blazing. They'll likely hang back, observe, and only step in if necessary." "Precisely," Nizu interjected, his voice calm but commanding. "Which is why we'll need to set up a secondary layer to the trap. We should have discrete surveillance teams focused solely on identifying and tracking the suspect. High-altitude drones, undercover operatives, and possibly even decoys to flush them out. We must anticipate their movements and ensure there's no avenue for escape." Tsukachi added, "And once we've identified the suspect, we don't engage immediately. We let them make their move, observe their tactics, and then strike when we're certain we can neutralize them effectively. The goal is to capture them alive, they're too valuable a source of information to lose." Midnight raised an eyebrow. "What about contingencies? What if they're packing more firepower than we anticipate, or worse, what if that robot of theirs shows up?" Kenji's ears twitched. "We've considered that. We'll have specialized anti-tech units on standby, equipped with EMP devices and hacking tools. The transport vehicle itself will also be rigged with an EMP failsafe in case of an ambush involving the robot." Nizu leaned back in his chair, his voice thoughtful. "It would also be wise to employ psychological tactics. For example, planting false weaknesses in the transport's defenses might lure the suspect into making a critical error. Their reliance on their own intellect could be their downfall." "Exactly," Tsukachi said with a small smile. The key here is to outthink the thinker. If we execute this plan correctly, we won't just catch the suspect, we'll dismantle their entire operation in one fell swoop. Kenji stood, gathering the files on the table. Well said, detective. This plan has potential, but execution will be critical. I'll meet with you later to finalize the details. For now, everyone needs to prepare. We'll need all hands on deck to pull this off. Kenji scanned the room, his sharp gaze settling on each person present. This operation hinges on unity and precision. We can't afford to leave any stone unturned. Before he could continue, a deep, measured voice interrupted. Kenji, I respect your strategy, but I have concerns. Eraserhead, his expression as unreadable as ever, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. This suspect's intelligence isn't the only threat here. If they're controlling advanced tech or possibly multiple assets, we need contingencies for contingencies. What's the protocol if they outmaneuver the trap entirely? Kenji nodded, acknowledging the point. You're absolutely right, Eraserhead. The protocol for an unexpected escape scenario includes high-altitude drones to track them, mobile hero units positioned on standby, and rapid response vehicles capable of pursuit. But, he added, meeting Eraserhead's gaze directly, if you have specific suggestions for shoring up our defenses, I'm listening. Eraserhead considered for a moment, then spoke. Double the drones and make sure they're silent and high-tech enough to avoid detection. Assign a second tracker, someone specialized in shadowing targets. If the suspect retreats, they'll likely try to erase any trace of themselves. We'll need someone who can follow without being seen. Kenji's tail flicked thoughtfully. Noted. I'll allocate additional resources to the drone units and consult with the surveillance team to find a specialist. Present Mike leaned back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head. Yo, Kenji, what's the deal with communication during the op? If things go south, we'll need a secure line, but one that's fast. None of that delayed dispatch nonsense. Kenji smirked faintly. Good point. We'll use encrypted direct comms, and I'll make sure every team is outfitted with updated gear. You volunteering for comms duty, Mike? Present Mike chuckled, his signature grin flashing. Nah man, but you need me to give a signal, I've got a voice that carries. The group shared a brief moment of levity before the deputy chief of police, a stern-faced man with a grizzled appearance, cleared his throat. Let's not lose focus, he said, his voice gravelly but commanding. Kenji, I need to know how you're prioritizing safety. Civilians come first, always. If this operation even hints at collateral damage, we're going to have to shutting it down. Kenji inclined his head respectfully. Civilian safety is paramount. We've chosen the transport route specifically to minimize public exposure. The roads will be closed and any nearby areas will be evacuated beforehand. If things go awry, we'll execute an immediate containment strategy. The deputy chief grunted in approval, but his eyes remained hard. Good. I don't want to explain to the public why their homes were leveled because we didn't plan ahead. Vlad King, who had been quiet until now, folded his arms and leaned forward. I'll volunteer my students as a support team if you need backup, he offered. They're not ready for direct combat against a threat like this, but they're disciplined and skilled enough to assist with crowd control or evac. They could be an asset. Kenji considered the offer. I appreciate that, Vlad. Let me evaluate the specifics of their involvement and ensure they're utilized in a way that prioritizes their safety. Vlad nodded, satisfied with the response. Nizu, ever the strategist, turned his attention to the table. If I may, I have a recommendation for bolstering the decoy transport. Why not include an extra layer of deception, perhaps an identical decoy vehicle, traveling an alternate route with visible hero support? It could divide the suspect's attention and force them to spread their resources thin. Kenji's ears perked up. An excellent idea. We'll implement that. The room fell silent again as everyone absorbed the rapidly forming plan. Finally, Kenji clapped his hands together. All right, people. We have a framework, but there's still work to do. Eraserhead, I want you to brief the shadow team. Deputy Chief, coordinate with the evacuation units. Vlad King, I'll follow up about your students. Nizu, I'll need your input for fine-tuning the decoys. And Mike, stay ready, your voice might actually come in handy. As everyone began to rise and prepare for their respective tasks, Kenji's voice cut through the room one last time. This suspect has eluded us for too long. They've jeopardized everything we stand for, and now it's time to bring them in. Let's make it happen. The group dispersed, each member carrying the weight of the mission on their shoulders. Oof. Midoriya groaned as his back hit the ground for what felt like the 100th time that day. His breathing was heavy, his limbs ached, and his uniform was coated in a thin layer of sweat and dirt. Towering over him, Metal, the sleek, crimson-eyed robot, extended a hand without hesitation. Izuku accepted the gesture, letting the robot's unyielding grip hoist him back to his feet. "All right," he panted, brushing off his uniform, "I think I'm starting to get the hang of this." The statement earned nothing more than a slight tilt of Metal's head, a silent acknowledgement that seemed to say, "Not quite, but you're improving." Now you might be wondering, why is Izuku sparring with a machine that's leagues beyond human speed, strength, and reflexes? The answer is simple: training. More specifically, learning martial arts. While Izuku had picked up bits and pieces of fighting techniques in the past, his knowledge was patchy at best. Before and after finding and repairing Metal, his training had been largely self-taught, relying on internet videos and books to scrape together the basics. And while his determination to learn was admirable, his results had been far from efficient. He lacked a proper mentor and there were glaring gaps in his technique. But then, Izuku had an idea, an ingenious one if he said so himself. One day, after careful thought, he plugged Metal directly into his Ethernet cable, granting the robot unfettered access to the entirety of the world's internet. Izuku gave it a straightforward command: "Learn everything there is to know about martial arts and teach me." Metal had stared at him silently for a moment, as though processing the absurdly broad command. Then, with a single affirmative nod, the robot's internal systems went into overdrive. It took just under 5 minutes. In that time, Metal's quantum computing capabilities had analyzed and synthesized centuries of martial arts history, techniques, philosophies, and strategies. It sorted through billions of data points, footage, manuals, research papers, and even anecdotal evidence from forums and blogs. When the process was complete, Metal had seamlessly fused the core principles of every major martial art into a single optimized fighting style. The result was a style designed specifically for Izuku, one that played to his strengths, minimized his weaknesses, and provided room to grow. But Metal didn't stop there. The robot also designed a comprehensive training program to teach this hybrid martial art, tailored specifically to Izuku's learning style. Training with Metal was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. The robot's methods were meticulous, starting with holographic demonstrations of techniques. Using its built-in projection system, Metal displayed every strike, block, and counter in vivid detail, complete with annotations highlighting angles, force, and precision. Izuku could rewind and replay each move as many times as he needed, ensuring he fully understood the mechanics. Once the theory was drilled into him, the real work began. Sparring with Metal wasn't just about brute strength, it was a test of adaptability. The robot varied its tactics with every match, sometimes overwhelming him with rapid strikes, other times forcing him into grapples or testing his endurance. Its movements were calculated, precise, and unrelenting, pushing Izuku to his limits and beyond. "Again," Izuku said, wiping sweat from his brow as he dropped back into his stance. His legs felt like jelly, his arms like lead, but he refused to stop. This was more than just training. It was a promise to himself to never be weak again. Metal raised its arms, signaling readiness. The fight began anew, each clash of fist and forearm a testament to Izuku's resolve. Every time he was knocked down, he stood back up, determination burning brighter in his eyes. Slowly but surely he was improving. The gaps in his technique were closing, his reactions growing sharper, his movements more fluid. For the first time in a long while, Izuku felt like he was truly moving forward, not just fumbling his way through challenges, but mastering them. As Metal lunged forward, Izuku countered with a perfectly executed block, a small but satisfying victory in the endless cycle of trial and error. He grinned despite the ache in his muscles. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. Oof, okay, maybe not thriving. Izuku stumbled backward, his breath coming in short bursts. His hair stuck to his forehead as sweat dripped down his face, soaking into his training clothes. He leaned on his knees trying to catch his breath. Metal Sonic stood across the training mat, frozen in a combat stance. His glowing red eyes softened slightly as he straightened up, mimicking a bow with his head dipped low and his hands clasped together in what could only be described as a respectful acknowledgement of his student's effort. Izuku chuckled at the overly formal gesture. "All right, Metal, I think that's enough for now." Metal Sonic tilted his head slightly but stepped back obediently, allowing Izuku to limp toward his desk. He grabbed a bottle of water and took several gulps, letting the cool liquid soothe his parched throat. When he turned around, Metal Sonic was still standing there, watching him intently as though awaiting further instructions. "You're really leaning into this mentor act, huh?" Izuku said, raising an eyebrow. Metal gave a slight shrug. How a robot managed to convey nonchalance was a mystery, but somehow he pulled it off. Izuku laughed again, shaking his head. Well, I guess if you're enjoying it, I can't complain. Satisfied, Metal Sonic moved to his designated charging station, folding his arms in what looked like a disciplined pose. Izuku turned his attention to his computer, sliding into the chair and cracking his knuckles. Let's see what's new, he muttered, bringing up his system. The screen flickered to life, displaying the police security database he had borrowed access to. Izuku still wasn't sure how he'd pulled it off, but between Metal Sonic's leftover data and his own obsessive tinkering, he had bypassed their security with surprising ease. He began scrolling through the usual files: patrol schedules, response times, incident reports, and dispatch records. His eyes skimmed over the data until something unusual caught his attention. A prison transfer. In broad daylight. He muttered, clicking the file to read the details. His brows furrowed as he scanned the report. Lasher? Never heard of him. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin as he read further. Lasher, according to the file, had an ability called WHP tendrils. The description explained that his body could generate razor-sharp, prehensile tendrils that could extend up to 20 meters, strong enough to slice through steel. Yikes, Izuku muttered. That's one dangerous guy. He glanced back at the file. Transport time 2 in the afternoon. Really? The more he read, the more bizarre the situation seemed. The file described the transport as a single vehicle with minimal SCRT, using an obvious and predictable route. He frowned. What the hell? They're treating this guy like he's a shoplifter, not a walking disaster waiting to happen. The lax security wasn't the only oddity. The file itself was shockingly easy to access. He hadn't even needed to bypass the server's firewall or deal with layered authentication protocols. It's like they just left it out in the open, he said, shaking his head. You'd think they'd have learned from, I don't know, every other disaster that's happened recently. Metal Sonic, hearing the muttering, turned his head slightly in Izuku's direction. Don't worry, it's nothing, Izuku assured him. Just the police being, well, the police. He leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the desk as his mind raced. A dangerous prisoner, a ridiculously vulnerable transport, and security so bad it's practically begging someone to interfere. He paused, tapping his fingers on the desk. This feels like a trap. But for who? For a moment he considered digging deeper into the police server, but something held him back. This wasn't his problem, not yet at least. Unless this Lasher guy has some big connections, it's not like I need to get involved, he mused, spinning his chair lazily. Still, the thought lingered in the back of his mind. If the transfer was as sloppy as it looked, someone would try to interfere. And if that someone was smart enough or dumb enough to pull it off, they might just expose themselves to people like him. Izuku smirked at the idea and opened a new tab on his computer. Well, let's see who else is making waves, he said, his curiosity steering him away from the prison transfer for now. Behind him, Metal Sonic remained still, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly as if silently observing the gears turning in Izuku's mind. 2 months till transfer Forge. That's what they called him. Others had tried different names: Red Circuit, Scarlet, Crimson Mine, blah blah blah. But Izuku liked Forge. It had a certain weight to it. If he had to pick a runner-up, Red Circuit wasn't half bad either. He walked down the shadowed, grimy alley, his trench coat swaying lightly with each step. His red helmet gleamed faintly under the dim, flickering light of a single street lamp. Beside him, Metal Sonic moved in silent precision, his glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness like twin lasers. Eventually, they reached their destination, a heavy, rusted metal door with faint graffiti scrawled across its surface. Izuku raised his hand and rapped sharply against the door. The sound echoed in the stillness of the alley, and a moment later, a latch slid open with a sharp clack. 2 suspicious eyes stared out from the slot. Password. The voice was gruff but carried a strangely high-pitched lilt. Izuku tilted his head slightly, his helmet's voice modulator lowering his tone to a smooth, confident baritone. There's a password, he asked, his smugness practically radiating through the altered voice. The man behind the door snorted, a raspy chuckle escaping him before he unlocked the multiple latches with a series of metallic clinks. The door creaked open, revealing a wiry man with uneven stubble and a patchy leather jacket. Welcome back, Forge, the man greeted, stepping aside to let him through. Izuku gave a curt nod as he strode inside, Metal following close behind. The thug's eyes flicked toward the robot, and he instinctively pressed himself against the wall, giving Metal a wide berth. Nobody wanted to test their luck with the death machine following Forge. "Good to be back, Thorn," Forge replied smoothly, not breaking stride. The hallway was dimly lit and reeked of mildew and oil, but as they reached the end, the narrow passage opened into a sprawling, dilapidated parking garage. It was chaos incarnate. Broken-down cars served as makeshift seats and tables. Groups of thugs and lowlifes huddled in tight circles, some playing cards, others passing bottles of questionable liquid. Fights broke out sporadically, drawing loud cheers and jeers from onlookers who had nothing better to do. In the far corner, a few crackheads twitched and muttered to themselves, ignored by the rest of the room. Gang insignias were spray-painted haphazardly on the walls, overlapping in a chaotic collage of territorial disputes. Forge stepped into the space, his boots crunching against debris and shattered glass. Eyes turned toward him briefly before quickly darting away. Nobody wanted to linger too long on Forge or his mechanical companion. His reputation preceded him, and even among criminals he was not someone to trifle with. "Busy as always," Forge muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with dry amusement. A group of gang members sitting on a dented hood glanced his way. One of them, a bulky guy with tattoos snaking up his arms, muttered something to his friends, nodding in Forge's direction. Forge ignored them, his focus already on the far side of the garage, where the true power players would be. He moved with purpose, weaving through the chaos like it was second nature. Metal followed in his wake, silent and unyielding, his glowing gaze sweeping the room like a predator sizing up its prey. A wiry teen barely old enough to grow stubble stepped into Forge's path, blocking his way. "Hey Forge, you got time?" to Metal's head turned toward him, eyes glowing brighter. The kid froze mid-sentence, stumbling back. "And never mind," he stammered, scurrying off. Forge chuckled softly, the sound distorted by his helmet. "You're scaring the locals, Metal," he said without looking back. Metal didn't respond, he didn't need to. As Forge continued deeper into the garage, the air seemed to thrum with tension. Somewhere in this den of chaos, plans were being made, deals struck, and alliances forged or broken. And Forge was here for all of it, ready to bend the chaos to his will. Forge climbed the crumbling concrete stairs to the second floor of the parking garage. The air was still, almost suffocating in its quiet, a stark contrast to the raucous chaos below. Up here there were no crackheads screaming nonsense or fistfights over petty grievances. This floor was for the players who actually mattered, the organized gangs, the masterminds. And most importantly, it was where Izuku's office stood. The structure had once been a small gatekeeper's booth, the kind where a bored attendant would check tickets or wave cars through. After years of abandonment, it had become a crackhead's hideout until Izuku politely asked Metal to usher the squatter out. Metal, true to form, had almost blasted the guy's head off with his arm-mounted laser. That was more than enough to send the man sprinting out of the building, screaming about red devils and killer robots. After a few choice renovations, a reinforced steel door, soundproofing, upgraded tech, and some stolen ergonomic furniture, the booth had transformed into Forge's sanctuary. And to Izuku's delight, no one dared to mess with it. No graffiti, no break-ins, not even a single fingerprint where it didn't belong. His growing reputation was finally paying dividends. Turns out, boosting a gang's success rate from 2% to 92% when you lend your expertise earns you loyalty and protection. He stepped into the booth, the door sealing shut with a satisfying hiss. The sound of faint cheers and idle chatter from below faded entirely. As he settled into his chair, the desk before him lit up with a soft red glow, his laptop screen flickering to life. It wasn't long before the first knock came. "Forge, good to see ya." Standing in the doorway was a wiry man with a grizzled appearance. He wore a black beanie, a green t-shirt layered beneath a scuffed leather jacket, and jeans that had seen better days. His full beard was patchy, but his sharp eyes gleamed with a mix of desperation and opportunism. "Rocco," Forge replied coolly, leaning back in his chair. His modulated voice carried a mechanical edge that added an air of authority. "What do you need?" Rocco scratched the back of his neck, hesitant for a moment. "Well, I've got a job. A big one. Not for me exactly, more for the crew." Forge tilted his head slightly, curiosity piqued. "And what does the crew need this time? Another batch of untraceable burners? A clean vehicle registry? Or are they just looking for better odds on their next little heist?" Rocco chuckled nervously, avoiding Metal's cold, glowing gaze. "Nah, this one's more complicated. They want a jammer. Not just any jammer, though, one strong enough to knock out the comms for a whole block. No signals, no calls, no drones, nothing. Clean blackout." Forge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. An EMP jammer, huh? That's bold. You planning to rob a tech depot, or are they just looking to play cat and mouse with the cops? Rocco shrugged. Something like that. Look, I don't ask questions. I just know they need it and they're willing to pay top dollar for it. You're the only guy I trust to build something that won't blow up the moment they hit the SWs. Forge considered the request, tapping his gloved fingers on the desk. A full-block jammer isn't exactly subtle, Rocco. They'll know something's up the moment it activates. You'd need a shielded setup to avoid frying your own tech, and the power requirements alone are ridiculous. That's why I came to you, Forge, Rocco said, spreading his arms. You're the genius, right? If anyone can pull it off, it's you. Forge let out a low, distorted chuckle. Flattery will only get you so far. Materials are going to cost, not to mention the time and effort. Hope the crew's ready to cough up. They are. Trust me, Forge. The payout's worth it. Forge sat back, the faint hum of his helmet the only sound in the room. He weighed the pros and cons before finally nodding. Fine. I'll draw up a blueprint and get you a list of what I'll need. But let them know if they misuse it and it brings heat my way, I'm holding you personally responsible. Rocco gulped but nodded quickly. Got it? You won't regret this, Forge. As Rocco left, Forge turned to Metal, who had been silently observing the exchange. Think this one will go smoothly? Forge asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Metal tilted his head slightly, the glowing eyes of his visor flickering briefly as if to say, do they ever? Ha, yeah, they don't, Forge chuckled, shaking his head before turning his attention to his computer. He opened a sleek, custom-built program labeled NeoForge Studio, a name that reflected its advanced nature. NeoForge Studio was a state-of-the-art 3D design and blueprinting application, something Forge had coded from scratch. It combined intricate 3D modeling capabilities with an integrated AI system capable of analyzing designs and suggesting the optimal materials for every component. The interface lit up, displaying a grid-like workspace. Forge created a new file, labeling it EMP Jammer, Block Scale. A blank 3D model appeared on the screen, ready to be molded into his vision. As he began sketching the core structure, a notification appeared on the bottom right corner of his screen. Vector. Consider hexagonal symmetry for optimal energy distribution. Good idea, Forge muttered, adjusting the design accordingly. He started forming the jammer into a compact hexagonal structure, with carefully calculated slots for its internal components. The jammer would function through a cascading electromagnetic pulse system. At its core, it housed a bank of ultra-dense capacitors designed to store massive amounts of energy. Once activated, the system would discharge the energy in controlled pulses, creating overlapping electromagnetic waves. These waves would saturate the block, disabling all electronics and communications within its radius. As Forge refined the design, another message popped up. Vector. Graphene-coated copper wiring will reduce resistance and optimize pulse strength. Estimated efficiency increase, 23%. Graphene, huh? Forge muttered, smirking behind his helmet. Yeah, that tracks. He implemented the suggestion, weaving the enhanced wiring through the blueprint. The device's range required extra power, so Forge added a multi-coil resonance amplifier, a layered array of induction coils placed in a hexagonal grid. This amplifier would exponentially enhance the jammer's output, ensuring it could bypass standard signal shielding. Another notification appeared. Vector. Suggestion: use a micro-fusion cell for power. Compact and sustainable for extended use. Forge paused, fingers tapping against his desk. Fusion, huh? Risky, but yeah, let's do it. He incorporated a containment unit for the fusion cell, shielding it against overheating or energy leakage. To prevent misuse, Forge programmed a dual-layer security system, a biometric lock coupled with an encrypted activation code. Only the crew or Forge himself could activate the jammer. The screen buzzed again. Vector. Design complete. Estimated range, 2 city blocks. Expected efficiency, 96%. Forge leaned back, admiring the completed 3D model. The device was sleek, practical, and carried a subtle edge of menace. Now that, he said, pointing at the screen, is a jammer. He saved the file and exported a detailed material list, including estimated costs and fabrication time. All right, Rocco, he muttered under his breath, let's see if the crew's ready to cough up for perfection. Metal, who had been silently standing guard near the door, turned his head slightly as if sensing Forge's satisfaction. Forge patted the side of his red helmet. All in a day's work, buddy. Elsewhere. A small, well-kept bar sat in comfortable silence, dimly lit by a warm amber glow. The bartender moved absently behind the counter, his purple, gaseous form somehow managing to hold a glass as he wiped it clean. His attire was immaculate: black pants, a white shirt covered by a matching black vest, and a metal neck brace that framed his glowing yellow eyes. He exuded an air of unshakable calm. The only other occupant was a young man, no older than his 20s, slouched over the counter. His pale blue hair fell messily over his face, dry, cracked skin peeling slightly under his relentless scratching. His red eyes burned with frustration, and a severed hand, ominous and grotesque, rested over his face like a mask. Tamura Shigaraki drummed his fingers against the wooden bar, careful to avoid pressing all 5 fingers down at once. The motion was jittery, restless. Then suddenly he slammed his fist into the counter with a loud thud. "Ah, this is ridiculous," he growled, his voice sharp and grating. Kurogiri barely flinched at the outburst, continuing his task with the same steady rhythm. "What's wrong, Shigaraki?" he asked, his deep voice calm, almost soothing, as if speaking to a frustrated child. "What's wrong? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Kurogiri. And that's the problem." Shigaraki snarled, scratching his neck with a manic fervor. His nails dragged against his dry skin, the habit as much a part of him as his rage. "We're supposed to be the League of Villains. And look at us, just the 2 of us sitting around doing nothing. We don't even have any new members yet. How the hell are we supposed to kill All Might like this?" Kurogiri set the glass down with a soft clink, unperturbed by Shigaraki's fury. "Actually," he began, his tone measured, "there may be a potential recruit." Shigaraki froze mid-scratch, turning to Kurogiri with wide, skeptical eyes. "Huh?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "Well, don't just stand there, tell me." "They call him Forge," Kurogiri said, as he poured a drink into a glass, sliding it across the counter toward Shigaraki. "Or sometimes Red Circuit." "Forge?" Shigaraki echoed, his irritation briefly giving way to curiosity. He grabbed the glass and took a swig, leaning back slightly. "What's his deal? Super strong or something? And if he's so important, why the hell haven't I heard of him before?" Kurogiri folded a towel neatly, his movements deliberate. "He's not known for raw strength," he explained. "His reputation stems from his mind. Forge is a strategist, a tactician of the highest caliber. He's made significant waves in the underworld recently. Many of the largest villain operations in the last year, those that succeeded against all odds, were made possible through his involvement." Shigaraki perked up, tapping his fingers against the glass thoughtfully. "Huh, an intellect main, huh," he muttered, his gamer vernacular slipping out. Kurogiri inclined his head slightly. "Indeed. He is also meticulous. From what I've gathered, he covers his tracks exceptionally well. Even the heroes seem largely unaware of his existence." Shigaraki let out a low chuckle, scratching his neck again, but with less intensity this time. "So he's smart and careful. That's annoying," he admitted, though a small grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. "But it could work for us. Someone like that, he might be useful." "Very useful," Kurogiri agreed. Shigaraki leaned forward, the light catching the sharp glint in his crimson eyes. "All right, Kurogiri. Find him. If he's really as good as you say, let's see if he's smart enough to join the League of Villains." "As you wish," Kurogiri said, bowing slightly. The bar returned to its quiet stillness, but the faint grin on Shigaraki's face lingered, a flicker of sinister hope taking root. "You got the goods?" Forge asked, his voice calm but laced with a sharp undertone of expectation. His hands were clasped together on the desk, fingers interlocked, as he stared at the man seated across from him. His green eyes scanned the figure carefully, noting every twitch, every movement. The man nodded silently and brought out a black, reinforced case, placing it on the desk with a dull thud. "Here it is," the man said, his voice deep and slightly muffled by the crow-shaped mask covering his mouth. He was an imposing figure, yellow hair slicked back, brown eyes narrowed with cautious confidence, and muscles that strained against his dark jacket. Forge leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk as he studied the case. His sharp gaze flicked back up to the man. "I'll be the judge of that," he replied coolly, snapping the case open. Forge's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Not bad," he muttered before nodding to Metal. The sleek, blue and silver robot stood behind Forge, its glowing red eyes fixed on the man across the desk. Without a word, Forge pulled out a bundle of cash and slid it across the desk. 150,000 yen as promised. The man picked up the cash, his gloved hands deftly counting the bills. He let out a low chuckle as he stood up, stuffing the money into his jacket pocket. "That's the good stuff," he said with a mocking lilt. "Don't go using it all in one place, kid." Forge didn't respond, but his hand twitched slightly, and that was all the Q metal needed. The robot's glowing eyes flared brighter as it took a single step forward, its servos emitting a faint, menacing hum. The man froze, feeling the weight of Metal's gaze bore into him like a laser. All right, the man said quickly, raising his hands defensively. "No offense meant. Just a joke." "Then don't joke," Forge said simply, his tone neutral but carrying an edge that cut through the tension. The man nodded stiffly, backing away. He'd heard the rumors about what that robot could do, about the genius behind it, and he wasn't about to test his luck. "Pleasure doing business," he muttered before turning and making a hasty exit. As the door swung shut, Forge stared at the case for a long moment before closing it with a decisive snap. "It better be," he muttered to himself, leaning back in his chair. Metal tilted its head, the faint whir of its sensors the only sound in the room. Forge glanced at the robot, chuckling under his breath. "Relax, Metal. He's not worth it." Metal stepped back to its usual position, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. Forge stood up, stretching his arms overhead with a satisfying crack. "Well," he said, rolling up his sleeve to glance at his watch. 1 a.m. "Seriously?" He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Guess I spent more time on that jammer blueprint than I thought. Time to pack up." Metal nodded, moving swiftly to gather the cases scattered around the room. It handled them with precision, stacking them neatly as Forge shut down his office. As he locked the door behind him, Forge glanced down the quiet garage illuminated by dim lights. His smirk returned as the faint hum of future plans buzzed in his mind. "Let's move, Metal," he said, his tone casual but purposeful. The blue and silver robot followed close behind, its glowing red eyes scanning the shadows for anything unusual. "Late night, huh?" Big Smoke's deep, gravelly voice cut through the quiet as he stepped out of the shadows, a thick cigar clamped between his teeth. Smoke curled lazily around his head as he leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed. Forge turned his head slightly, recognizing the voice immediately. "You could say that." "Long time no see, Smoke," he replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Big Smoke let out a low chuckle, the kind that carried the weight of years spent on rough streets. "No kidding," he said, exhaling another thick plume of cigar smoke. "You've been keeping busy, kid. And I see your creepy little tin can still tagging along." Metal's glowing red eyes locked onto Smoke with unsettling precision, its gaze unblinking. For a long moment, it just stared, as if evaluating the man's very existence. "Always watching, huh?" Big Smoke grumbled, shifting uncomfortably under the robot's scrutiny. "Creeps me out every DMN time." Metal didn't respond, instead turning its head slightly, its servos humming softly as it shifted its focus back to Forge. Forge shrugged. "He's good at what he does. Can't say the same for everyone I meet out here." Big Smoke barked a laugh, though it was tinged with a nervous edge. "Fair enough, kid. Fair enough. But look, I ain't here to waste your time. Just came to give you a little heads up." Forge raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Heads up? About what?" Big Smoke glanced around, his usual cocky demeanor faltering as his gaze darted to the shadows lining the alley. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a rough whisper. "Nightmares on her hunt." Forge froze, the weight of those words hitting him like a hammer. For a moment, he stood motionless, the faintest gulp escaping the confines of his helmet. "Nightmare?" he echoed, his voice quieter, more measured now. "Yeah," Big Smoke said, his cigar briefly dangling from his lips before he snatched it away to speak clearly. His tone dropped to something darker, more serious. "I ain't joking, kid. She's been prowling these streets the past few nights. You know how she works, silent, brutal, leaves nothing but carnage behind. If she gets a whiff of you or that shiny bucket of bolts, you're done. You hear me? Done." Forge's smirk was long gone, replaced with a steely expression. "Appreciate the warning, Smoke," he muttered, his voice carrying a gravity that matched the situation. Big Smoke took a shaky drag of his cigar, his hands not quite as steady as he'd like. "Don't think I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. You keep the heat off this side of town and I get to sleep a little easier. But Nightmare, she don't play by the rules. Ain't nobody safe when she's out." Forge nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities and contingencies. "Got it? Thanks, Smoke. Stay out of trouble." Big Smoke huffed, stuffing his cigar back in his mouth. "Trouble's what keeps the BLD pumpin', kid. But tonight, I think I'll pass. Without another word, Smoke turned and hurried off, his usual swagger noticeably muted as he disappeared into the foggy night. Forge exhaled slowly, glancing at Metal. You heard him, he said softly. Metal nodded, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly as if preparing for what lay ahead. The first floor of the abandoned garage was deathly silent. The kind of silence that pressed down on your chest, making every breath feel heavier. Forge stepped cautiously, his boots echoing faintly against the cracked concrete. The place was deserted, a graveyard of rusted tools, broken-down vehicles, and forgotten debris. Well, Forge muttered under his breath, the words barely audible. He knew exactly why the usual some that lurked in places like this had vanished. Nightmare. The underworld's most terrifying enigma. Nobody knew who she was. What she truly was. But everyone knew the stories. Her victims were everywhere, thugs, cops, even heroes. Sometimes it was just unlucky civilians who decided to take a very late-night walk. They all ended the same way, vanished into the shadows or left behind in pieces. Forge clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. He wasn't planning to become her next victim. His eyes darted around the garage, scanning for any signs of movement. Nothing. He quickly made his way to a narrow passage leading to the exit of the parking garage. "Diamante Thorn," he grumbled under his breath. His contact wasn't here, which meant he had to handle the rusty exit door himself. He gripped the handle and pulled, wincing at the agonizing screech of the hinges. The sound echoed through the emptiness, slicing through the silence like a scream. Forge froze. Listening. Nothing. He stepped outside, glancing back as Metal scanned the area behind them. The robot was unusually thorough, its glowing red eyes sweeping every inch of the shadows with cold precision. "Metal," Forge whispered. "What is it?" Metal didn't answer, but its posture stiffened, servos emitting a faint hum. Something was there. Watching. "Let's go," Forge ordered quietly. Metal obeyed, its movements calculated and near silent. The alleys were deserted. Lifeless. But Forge could feel it now, the same unease that had gripped Metal. The air was thick, suffocating, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Someone or something was watching them. His hand drifted toward his pocket, fingers brushing against the handle of his blaster. The weight of it was comforting, but it did little to ease the growing dread curling in his gut. The silence was oppressive. Even Metal, usually a steady companion, had shifted into full stealth mode. Its servos and systems were muted to a near-impossible silence. The feeling only grew worse with every step. Forge's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. He couldn't shake the sensation that they were being hunted. Finally, they reached their first stop, a slightly more open alleyway. The lack of fire escape stairs or debris gave them a clear path. Forge didn't need to give any instructions. Metal was already moving. The robot grabbed Forge with one hand while holding the cases in the other, its ion thruster powering up with a faint whir. They lifted off, ascending into the night sky. Forge exhaled softly, relief washing over him as he glanced back at the alley below. And then he felt it. That terrible, suffocating awareness. She'd seen him. He couldn't see her, but he knew without a doubt that she had been there. Watching. Waiting. The weight of her gaze lingered, like a phantom touch against his skin. In the shadows below, she stepped into the dim light for just a moment. Her black and red dress clung to her form, flowing like spilled ink around her. One eye gleamed vivid crimson, glowing faintly in the low light, while the other shimmered with the intricate design of a golden clock. The hands within ticked in perfect synchrony, their mechanical beauty at odds with the malice in her gaze. She tilted her head ever so slightly as if in amusement, her lips curling into a faint, chilling smile. "So you're Forge, huh?" she murmured. Her voice was soft, playful, and yet dripping with venomous intent. Her head tilted further, and she giggled, a light, chilling sound that didn't belong in the world of the living. It echoed in the empty alleyway, lingering like a specter. "Interesting," she whispered. And then she was gone. Melted back into the shadows like she had never been there at all. Forge shuddered despite himself, gripping Metal's arm tighter as they flew higher. His mind raced, replaying the encounter or lack thereof. He hadn't seen her fully. But the image of that clockwork eye and the malice in her presence had burned into his memory. "She saw us," he muttered under his breath. Metal didn't respond, but its grip on him tightened slightly. The city stretched out below them, its lights flickering like distant stars. But Forge couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far they flew, nightmare was still there. Forge got home after a short flight, taking his usual route inside through the basement window. It was second nature by now, landing silently, slipping through the opening, and making sure to close it just enough to keep prying eyes away. The basement was cluttered, a mix of makeshift workbenches, spare parts, and the occasional half-finished project. He wasted no time shedding his helmet, trench coat, and camo uniform, replacing them with a black t-shirt and red shorts. He swapped his boots for a pair of well-worn red sneakers, the kind that squeaked faintly on smooth surfaces. "Metal," he said, extending a hand. The robot stepped forward, handing him one of the cases with its usual mechanical efficiency. Izuku set it down on a desk, his fingers tracing the latches before popping it open with a satisfying click. Inside, in all its forbidden, gleaming glory, were 5 small canisters of trigger. Whoa. Illegal. Deadly. Izuku stared at them for a moment, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Trigger was a fascinating little devil. On the surface, it was just an ability-enhancing drag, something that could take even the weakest meta user and turn them into a powerhouse for a short time. But calling it just a drag was like calling a flamethrower just a candle. Trigger worked by targeting the meta cells, the tiny biological wonders that gave people their abilities. Normally, meta cells operated like well-trained soldiers, dutifully carrying out their roles without complaint. Trigger, however, didn't believe in playing nice. The drag essentially turned those meta cells into overworked slaves. It flooded the system with synthetic hormones and energy compounds, forcing the cells to operate at 10 times their normal capacity. The result? A user's meta ability output skyrocketed. They'd be faster, stronger, or more powerful depending on their ability. For a few glorious minutes they'd feel like gods. But, like all things that sound too good to be true, Trigger came with a price tag. First, there were the mental effects. While under the influence, users often lost control of their emotions, becoming irrational, hyper-aggressive, or downright feral. Some described it as being a passenger in their own body, watching helplessly as they rampaged. And then there were the physical side effects. Trigger didn't just overwork the meta cells, it burned them out. Prolonged use left permanent damage, reducing ability effectiveness or, in extreme cases, causing abilities to fail entirely. Meta cells weren't built to withstand that kind of abuse, and once they broke, they didn't heal. And let's not forget the overdoses. Overdosing on Trigger was like pouring gasoline on an already roaring fire. The meta cells would go into overdrive, producing power far beyond the body's limits. Muscles would tear, bones would snap, and internal organs would literally cook from the inside out. It wasn't a pretty way to go. One poor idiot reportedly detonated his ability so violently that his remains had to be scraped off 3 separate buildings. Izuku chuckled darkly at the thought. Trigger, the gift that keeps on giving until it doesn't. He reached out, grabbing one of the canisters and holding it up to the light. It was incredible, really, how something so small and seemingly harmless could cause so much devastation. Tiny blue death sticks, he muttered under his breath. He wasn't planning to use them, of course not yet at least. But having them, that was a different story. Izuku snapped the case shut, locking it with a soft click. The robot said nothing as usual, but its faintly glowing eyes seemed to hold a silent judgment. "Don't give me that look," Izuku quipped. "It's not like I'm gonna take the DMN stuff." "Probably." Metal's head tilted slightly, an almost human gesture of skepticism. Izuku sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Alright, fine. Definitely not. Happy now." Metal didn't respond, but Izuku could swear the robot's gaze lingered on him a little longer than usual. "Not like it would do me any good anyway," Izuku muttered, staring at the canister in his hand. He was a cripple after all. No meta ability to his name. Just a regular, ability-less kid trying to play in a world designed for superhumans. But the thought lingered. What would happen if he took it? Would it do nothing, or would the drag start messing around with his other cells, scrambling him from the inside out? Izuku wasn't about to test his luck, not with something so potent that even the distributors had the decency to dilute it. Especially not when the version he had was pure and undiluted. Now you might be wondering, what on God's green earth would he possibly need this for? He had a theory. See, while Trigger was toxic, almost as friendly to the human body as cyanide, it was still a step in the right direction. The problem wasn't the drag itself, but the fact that meta cells just weren't capable of handling that kind of strain. They'd burn out, collapse, or explode in a spectacularly messy fashion. And there wasn't much anyone could do to change that. But you know what could potentially handle the strain? Muscles. Muscles were tougher than the average meta cell, more resilient, and capable of absorbing higher loads of stress. Of course, even then, the strain could still cause damage. But it was enough of a loophole for Izuku to latch onto. Which brought him to his second case. With a soft click, the lid popped open, revealing rows of neatly organized vials. These weren't nearly as exotic as Trigger, just your good old-fashioned steroids. Steroids weren't technically illegal, at least not in the same league as Trigger. But they still had their fair share of side effects. For one, they could turn a scrawny kid into a beefcake in record time. A few injections, a couple of weeks, and voila. Instant gym bro transformation. But the downsides? Oh, those were chef's kiss. Izuku chuckled dryly as he ran through the list in his head. Hair loss, acne, shrinking ball, mood swings that could rival the Hulk, and an energy so overclocked it could probably break the sound barrier. Real tempting, he muttered sarcastically. Still, despite the amusing drawbacks, steroids were also a step in the right direction. But they weren't the endgame. Not by a long shot. The third case. That was a whole different beast. Izuku placed the steroid case aside and opened the last one, his fingers brushing over the vial inside like it was a holy relic. The glowing green liquid stared back at him, almost alive. Venom. It wasn't just a relic, it was practically mythology. Venom was an ancient supplement, created back in the pre-meta era roughly 200 years ago. Its birthplace. A backwater city in America called Gotham. This wasn't just any enhancement drag. Venom was steroids on steroids. It didn't just bulk you up. It transformed you into something bordering on superhuman. Reports from that time claimed that its primary user, some guy named Bane, had feats of strength that could rival modern-day C-tier abilities. And this was before meta abilities even existed. How did Izuku know all this? Well, he might have accidentally stumbled upon some leaked information while exploring the darker corners of the internet. The original post barely got any attention, most people dismissing it as fake or outright trolling. Some comments were the usual nonsense: fake news, this isn't real, and of course, I'm gonna touch you. But Izuku had decided to dig deeper. And sure enough, the evidence was real. Venom wasn't just a marvel of biochemistry, it was a monument to human ingenuity. It worked by rapidly increasing muscle mass and physical strength to absurd degrees. The catch: it was insanely addictive. Safer versions were eventually developed, clean, effective, and without the same disastrous side effects, but the operation was shut down almost immediately. What? Who knows? Politics maybe. Paranoia. The usual. But before it all went under, the creator had left one final middle finger to the American government. They posted the chemical formula everywhere. Naturally, the U.S. responded with their usual subtlety by wiping the formula clean off the surface of the internet, both nationally and internationally. But they missed a spot. Russia. Izuku's grin widened as he remembered the absurdity of it all. While scrolling through the remnants of an obscure Russian network, he'd found the file. Just sitting there, untouched, like an artifact in a dusty museum. It hadn't been accessed in over 150 years. A few days, some questionable chemical acquisitions, and countless hours of preparation later, the result was now sitting comfortably on his desk. A vial of glowing green liquid. Venom. Alright, so, Izuku murmured, leaning back in his chair. What's the plan? Why the hell would I need Trigger, steroids, and an ancient supersteroid? He had a theory. If he could execute it correctly, he'd potentially never need to work out again. But God, was it a pain in the butt to simulate the chemical reaction without it blowing up in his computer? Still, he had time. And Izuku was nothing if not patient.